American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 701 to 725. Rumble. Accompanied by the deafening roar of golden magnetic boots impacting heavily upon thick chest armor. The two jagged ram horns located on Red Magnus's chest instantly snapped off. Numerous fragments of shattered armor also drifted slowly into the surrounding air along with the wreckage of the horns. At this moment, Primarch Rorschach, who was the first of the three to approach the enemy, abruptly manipulated the propulsion system on the back of his power armor, flipping his towering body in midair. Subsequently, as his magnetic boots landed heavily, the blood scythe and the Hearthbreaker Warhammer, gripped tightly in Primarch Rorschach's hands, slammed heavily into Red Magnus's lower body, even severing his thick legs, comparable in size to the height of an ordinary Astartes, almost completely at the root. Immediately following, accompanied by the sound of a power weapon swinging like a roaring tiger, Cypher Rorschach, wielding the white tiger blade, also successfully arrived near Red Magnus. With incredibly agile movements, he leapt up from the ground, one of his magnetic boots stepping on Primarch Rorschach's power pack. In an instant, Cypher Rorschach, borrowing a slight amount of force, soared into the air like a ball being launched. Then, the white tiger blade in his hand, enveloped in a continuous tiger's roar, slammed down heavily towards Red Magnus's crimson face. Roar. The next second, accompanied by the ruthless, heavy blow of the sharp-edged white tiger blade, which penetrated deep into Magnus's hard skull. A painful, angry roar, slowed down countless times by an invisible temporal field, slowly erupted from the depths of the Red One's immense body. Chi. At this moment, held tightly in one of the opponent's crimson hands, the massive spellbook suddenly erupted with a surge of terrifying psychic fluctuations that seemed to transcend the concept of time. And in an instant, it sent Cypher Rorschach, who was in midair, flying outwards. Dong dong dong. Just as Cypher Rorschach was sent flying backwards, with long blood-red hair fluttering in the wind and eyes as scarlet as a corn demon, Werewolf Rorschach, whose tattered power armor seemed to be surrounded by wisps of crimson light, also charged forward fiercely. His eyes wide, he subconsciously let out a roar that echoed all around him, as his two magnetic boots stomped back and forth on the ground. He swung the frost axe in his hand and leapt up from the ground. Boom! Accompanied by another painful roar, slowed down countless times. The frost axe, with its extremely sharp, broad blade, slammed heavily into the depths of Red Magnus's chest. The force used by Werewolf Rorschach was so great that it almost severed countless rib plates within the opponent's body, as well as the thick spine, whose sturdiness was probably comparable to adamantium. Retreat. My bullet time is about to fail. At this moment, Cypher Rorschach, who had just activated his power armor to quickly rise from the ground, instantly changed his expression. He merely glanced down at the position of his ceramite chestplate. Then, without even thinking, he shouted loudly at Primarch Rorschach and Werewolf Rorschach, who were repeatedly hacking at Red Magnus. Rumble. Before Cypher Rorschach's words could completely fade away, accompanied by the invisible temporal field gradually dissipating around them, a terrifying psychic storm that had been accumulating for a long time suddenly erupted from within Red Magnus's immense body. And Werewolf Rorschach, whose towering body was almost clinging to one of the opponent's crimson arms, naturally bore the brunt of the greatest impact force as he repeatedly swung the frost axe to hack at Red Magnus's shattered head. He suddenly spewed out a large cloud of scarlet mist, stained with specks of psychic fire, from his mouth and nose. His entire body was also sent flying directly towards the desolate ground thousands of meters away. However, Primarch Rorschach, who was also being sent flying backwards, did not show any panic. Wearing his skull helmet, he quickly manipulated the propulsion system on the back of his power armor, forcibly stabilizing his towering body in the extremely chaotic airflow. The next second, Primarch Rorschach's gaze was fixed on Red Magnus's immense body, on the terrifying injuries that were being repaired and filled with a large amount of warp energy. He actually, in the face of the opponent's vicious gaze that wished it could devour him alive, and the chaos sorcery that was constantly being condensed between the pages of the spellbook, slowly raised a hand made of vibranium, seemingly gripping something tightly. And whether it was Cypher Roche standing in the distance or Red Magnus, who was almost within reach, they subconsciously turned their gazes to look over. Then, they instantly realized that it was a remote detonator for a melt-a-bomb. 22. U. At this moment, Red Magnus, whose expression was even more ferocious, hurriedly looked down, only to discover that between the ground beneath his immense body, Primarch Roche had already piled up dense masses of melt-a-bombs in advance. Subsequently, just as Red Magnus, with a drastic change in expression, condensed a thick psychic shield that enveloped his entire body, Primarch Roche, hovering in midair, also fiercely pressed down on the detonator in his hand. Rumble. In an instant, the desolate ground within 1,000 meters was forcibly melted into pools of orange-red magma, accompanied by the even more chaotic chaos psychic fluctuations and air turbulence around them. Waves of extremely terrifying explosive shockwaves, along with the scorching heat, swept towards everything in the vicinity. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, Primarch Roche, frantically manipulating the propulsion system to continuously spray upwards, narrowly avoided the explosive range of a large number of melt-a-bombs. After his entire body quickly passed through the mushroom-shaped smoke and dust that had almost risen and permeated the depths of the sky, he slowly adjusted his flight direction and landed heavily towards Cypher Rock's position. "Hey, brother, do you think that Red Ogren was successfully banished by us?" Before long, Cypher Roche, covered in dirt, climbed up from the loose soil and shouted loudly at Primarch Roche, who had landed heavily. And his gaze also subconsciously looked towards Werewolf Roche, who had just climbed up in the distance. "I don't know, after all, we didn't prepare any banishment rituals or sealing methods, and this place is located inside the Eye of Terror, where the surrounding chaos psychic energy can be said to be inexhaustible." Hearing the other party's question, Primarch Rock's gaze, through the helmet's visor, stared fixedly at the center of the explosion, which seemed to have no special movement, and he continued in a low voice. "Cypher, immediately notify everyone not to get entangled with the Red Tide warriors, and retreat quickly towards the webway portal. We must prevent Red Magnus from making a comeback." At this moment, Severus Roche, hearing the order from Primarch Roche, had no hesitation or doubt. He casually slung the White Tiger greatsword over his back, then drew a plasma pistol and a bolter from his waist, driving his power armor and striding towards the battlefield where fierce fighting was still taking place. Meanwhile, Primarch Roche, wearing a skull helmet, vigilantly stared at the surrounding sky and the direction of the explosion's epicenter. A large amount of chaos warp energy, which had not completely dissipated, permeated the area. "Thanks, Primarch brother. If you guys hadn't come, I'm afraid I would have capsized in the gutter today." Just then, Leman Roche, staggering slightly, came to Primarch Rock's side, carrying his frost great axe. His gaze was also fixed on the front, as he casually spoke to Primarch Roche. "Helping each other was the agreement we made in the beginning, and how could I not participate in dealing with these traitor Primarchs?" Roche, wearing the skull helmet, said without turning his head. However, before Leman Roche, grinning, could speak again, the two present clearly felt a large amount of chaos warp energy, at a higher concentration, rampaging continuously in the surrounding air. "Russ above, isn't that disgusting one-eyed ogre dead yet?" At this moment, Leman Roche, instinctively bearing a pair of snow-white fangs, cursed fiercely. "That's because the Eye of Terror is too closely connected to the warp. If it were in the real world, that thermal explosion just now would definitely have sent Magnus rolling back to his crystal labyrinth. Also, I observed that the speed at which that chaos warp energy is condensing is too fast. It won't be long before the opponent reappears. We must buy some time for the other teams to retreat now." At this moment, Roche, slightly shaking his skull helmet, suddenly raised a hand clad in auramite. In the next second, a bellicose pattern volcano cannon mounted on a heavy vehicle chassis, and several Hellfire missiles, individually placed on launchers, suddenly appeared in front of the two. Russ's leg hair. Why do you and Severus have special means of storing supplies, but I don't even have a single hair? Leman Roche, unable to resist widening his eyes, casually complained to Primarch Roche. At the same time, he nimbly moved closer to the Hellfire missiles, quickly starting to study how to launch them. Chi. Immediately afterwards, accompanied by the dazzling firelight that suddenly erupted from the tail of a Hellfire missile. The Hellfire missile, guided solely by Leman Roche's line of sight, suddenly rose from the launch rack. Then, it swiftly launched another bombing run towards the previous explosion's epicenter. At the same time, Primarch Roche, driving his Auramite power armor, leapt from the ground and quickly arrived above the heavy chassis. He casually fastened his hand on the launch button of the bellicose pattern volcano cannon, and after slightly adjusting the firing angle of the muzzle, streams of incomparably thick, blazing white beams also launched a continuous, fierce bombardment towards the front. Rumble. In an instant, the Hellfire missile, with an explosion scale seemingly far greater than before, completely covered a large area. Those continuously rolling and ascending explosive flames and intense shockwaves also rapidly reduced the concentration and amount of chaos warp energy. It even blasted a huge, vague figure deep within the explosion's epicenter into slowly recoagulating fragments once again. Although, due to the Eye of Terror's internal connection with the warp being too close, it was difficult to completely kill some powerful warp creatures without preparing a banishment ritual. But correspondingly, after all, there were still some physical rules belonging to the real world here. Therefore, many high-powered weapons could still exert their normal destructive effects. Not long after, on the battlefield behind the two, Severus Roche, tightly gripping his dual pistols, leapt and sprinted back and forth, terminating the last red-tide warrior who could still move. He forcibly blasted the opponent into a sky full of flying armor fragments. Taking a deep breath, he quickly turned his head to look back. His sight immediately saw the Primarch's Terminator Guard leading the remaining few dozen Space Wolves brothers, all of whom had temporarily regained their sanity, on a retreat operation. The Librarius squad from the Blood Ravens Great Company was also striving to use a large amount of psychic energy to prop up a thick psychic barrier around the webway portal, while the Battle Brothers of the Raven Guard Great Company tightly gripped their bolters, preventing any further accidents from occurring. In the next moment, a loud shout from Severus Roche quickly transmitted over. Leman Roche, having just launched the last Hellfire missile, also raised his hand in response to the other. Primarch Roche turned and jumped off the increasingly overheated volcano cannon, casually stowing the heavy vehicle chassis back into his storage space. Subsequently, the two, almost without turning their heads, began sprinting wildly towards the direction of the webway portal. Rumble. Just then, the red sky above the crowd's heads seemed to suddenly undergo some even more bizarre changes. A sudden warp storm unexpectedly appeared out of thin air and quickly enveloped this nameless planet. This forced the crowd, who subconsciously raised their heads to examine the terrifying scene, to accelerate their speed and pace of entering the webway portal. And after the Blood Ravens Librarius squad and the Raven Guard, who were propping up the psychic shield, also quickly returned to the interior of the webway portal. The three Roche, who had just arrived nearby, also drove their power armor and stepped directly inside without any hesitation. Buzz. However, in the next second, the terrifying warp energy fluctuations that suddenly swept across the entire nameless planet instantly tore apart the webway portal that had not yet completely closed. It also successfully disrupted the teleportation function that was still operating inside, directly throwing the three Roche into the depths of the warp. Pung, accompanied by a burst of rumbling sounds produced by the continuous collision of armor shells. On top of a cold ground covered with thick snow, three slightly embarrassed, tall figures suddenly rolled out one after another from a warp rift. In the next second, Leman Roche, who could remain unperturbed even when facing a demon Primarch, suddenly propped up his upper body. His face was ashen as he violently vomited towards the snow beside him. I've successfully experienced what it feels like to be thrown directly into a tumbler. Leman Roche mumbled indistinctly, grabbing a handful of cold snow and stuffing it into his mouth to chew. At the same time, Rorschach, who had just removed his skull helmet, also drove his power armor to sit up, his face unpleasant. He subconsciously took a breath of the surrounding cold air, constantly twitching his nose and saying, without even thinking about it, "It must be that damned Magnus or Tzeentch schemed against us when the three of us entered the webway portal. Severus, what do you think? Where have we been thrown? Could it be another unfamiliar planet located in the Eye of Terror? Or the depths of the warp?" Facing the inquiry from Primarch Rorschach, Severus Rorschach, whose face was also quite unsightly, barely propped up his tall body. After looking around, he suddenly turned his head and asked Leman Rorschach, "Wolf Cub, do you feel like this place looks somewhat familiar?" Huh. Upon hearing Cypher Roach's words, the Wolf Roach was initially slightly stunned. Then, he abruptly activated his damaged power armor with its ceramite shell, standing up from the snowy ground. Wolf Roach squinted, scanning the surrounding environment, a mix of unfamiliarity and familiarity, and almost instantly grinned widely. "Ha ha ha, if I'm not mistaken, this is our Space Wolves' homeworld, Fenris. Brothers, we've actually come home." At this moment, Primarch Rorschach, his expression revealing surprise, also activated his vibranium power armor and stood up. He squinted, twitching his nose, and muttered to himself, "I must say, this time the wolf cub isn't talking nonsense. I also feel that the air here does indeed smell like Fenris. Could it be that chaos wasn't scheming against us? But rather, it was the Emperor's little trick. But that doesn't make sense. Wouldn't a simple psychic decree be enough to move us around at will? Oh well, we're already here, are we going to leave immediately? Why worry so much?" The Wolf Roach, his mental state clearly more excited, abruptly shook his head, the long gray hair matted with dried blood. He smiled and turned to Cypher Roach and Primarch Rorschach, who were standing in front of him, and said, "Brothers, don't you all have your own storage spaces? Why not just pull out a Thunderhawk transport? It would save us the effort of trekking a long distance. Let's go to the Ett first and have a good drink with those old wolves. If that's not enough, then I'll take you to hunt sea monsters in the Sea of Ice, absolutely thrilling. Are you here for tourism?" However, at this moment, facing Wolf Roach's completely unreliable words, Cypher Roach retorted coldly, glancing at the silent Primarch Rorschach, then took a deep breath and said, "Forget about the Storm Eagle transport. My temporal crystal can only hold a small amount of stuff. It's basically filled with spare power armor and various weapons and ammunition for quick replacement. A long time ago, I did store a few Eldar hoverbikes and land speeders, but I lost them in a series of actions later. Primarch, what about you? Truth be told, I don't have any flying vehicles stored. I do have a few heavy ground vehicles, but it would be a bit too ostentatious to just use them for travel, wouldn't it? But your words have reminded me. In the future, I will fill the storage page with corresponding vehicles to deal with various battlefield situations. It can be considered as making the best use of the storage page's function." Roach took a deep breath and shook his head slightly, his short gray hair standing on end. He said to the two people in front of him in a low voice. Thus, the three people, looking at each other, could only helplessly use the surrounding terrain and the occasional icy sun appearing in the sky to tentatively determine the direction of their advance. Subsequently, they activated their power armor and embarked on the long trek to the Ett. In fact, when the three roaches finally confirmed that they had indeed arrived on Fenris, the wariness and vigilance in each of their hearts seemed to be completely let down. Whether it was Primarch Rorschach, shouldering heavy responsibilities, or Cypher Roach, with his deep thoughts, the expressions on their faces became significantly more diverse, and their expressions became much gentler. As for Wolf Roach, who seemed to have completely returned to his nature. Having just experienced a long and arduous battle, he seemed to have regained his vitality and stamina under the nourishment of Fenris. In the subsequent journey, he not only took on many trivial tasks such as hunting Fenris elk and roasting prey alone. He even unexpectedly gained prestige from a group of Fenris wolves who were wandering and hunting, becoming the humanoid alpha wolf in this pack. It was also with the continuous assistance and exploration of this group of Fenris wolves. Approximately several days later, the three roaches, stepping onto a cold snow peak, had their first contact with a squad of Astartes who were undergoing basic newcomer trials. And when two Astartes instructors, specifically responsible for overseeing the newcomers, quickly walked out from behind those Fenrisians whose eyes were filled with confusion and curiosity. Their expressions were so excited that they could hardly suppress their inner emotions, and they immediately knelt on one knee in the direction of Primarch Roach, offering their greetings to the Primarch. In the next moment, the boisterous wolf Roach grinned widely and reached out to forcibly pull the two space wolves up from the ground. And he also warned everyone that this Primarch, like Old Man Bjorn, didn't like people kneeling to him. The two space wolves first stared in confusion at this Astartes brother whose appearance was almost exactly the same as the Primarch. Then they seemed to suddenly understand and hugged the helpless wolf Roach heavily. And as time passed, the two space wolves immediately called for a Storm Eagle transport to the Et. After the three roaches temporarily said goodbye to them, they quickly stepped into the interior of the Storm Eagle transport's cabin, choosing to travel to the Et in a faster manner. And when the three roaches successfully arrived at the entrance of the Et, the three roaches, who had just stepped out of the cabin, almost immediately saw a very large, and extremely ancient, dreadnought. That was the Space Wolves chapter's treasured artifact, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the Leman Russ's former bodyguard who had followed the Wolf King in countless battles. Facing this Astartes venerable, worthy of everyone's respect, Wolf Roach and Cypher Roach quickly activated their power armor and stepped forward, bowing to Bjorn without any hesitation. And when Primarch Roach also activated his vibranium power armor and came close, intending to bow to him, a huge power claw suddenly blocked Primarch Roach's path. Respected Primarch, an old man who hasn't died yet can't afford your courtesy. After all, you are, in any case, a blood brother to our Gene father. Huh. Are you that little wolf cub who saw the Wolf King back then? You're still alive, but why do you and the Lion Prince's descendant next to you look so much like this Primarch? At this moment, facing Old Man Bjorn's deep words and a few doubts, Cypher Roach moved his mag boots. He briefly mentioned to Old Man Bjorn the power of the Emperor and the various connections between the three of them. In the next moment, after seemingly being silent for a while, Old Man Bjorn slowly let out a heavy sigh from inside the dreadnought. People are getting old after all, and their ideas can't keep up with the changes of time. Perhaps even old antiques like the Imperial Truth will have to be thrown into the trash can and burned. Come with me, Primarch, and you two youngsters, Fenris welcomes your arrival. When the massive Bjorn the Fell-Handed personally led Leman Russ and his companions through the gates of Blood and Sunrise. After they had truly entered the interior of the Fang, dozens of the sons of Fenris, patrolling back and forth between the Valgards, surged towards them, greeting the Primarch Leman Russ continuously. The space wolf Leman Russ suddenly stepped forward, his expression excited. He had inadvertently spotted a familiar, towering figure among the crowd. It was Ulrich the Slayer, who had just removed his metal mask. Safe Leman Russ scanned the number of space wolves around him. He also happened to learn from a tall figure with red hair that Fenris was currently in the midst of the Great Hunt, and only this many Astartes remained at the Fang. This was why Bjorn the Fell-Handed himself was receiving them. Soon after, the group went together to a long sealed Great Hall, which was the central banquet hall of the Fang. As Bjorn the Fell-Handed suddenly brandished his massive power claw and his booming voice echoed around them, excited mortal servants began to bring in piles of freshly roasted meat and Fenrisian mead, which could only be stored in Kraken spine containers. Faced with the warm hospitality of the sons of Fenris, Leman Russ and his companions, their faces full of helplessness, had no choice but to pick up the jet-black Fenrisian meat and join the increasingly lively feast. When the feast had progressed for some time, and everyone was in high spirits, every Astartes present seemed to have set aside the symbols of honor and rank, toasting and singing with each other. At this moment, the head-shaking, swaying space wolf Leman Russ stood on an ancient wooden table in the Great Hall. He and the ever-hesitant Great Deceiver Lucas were engaged in a lively game of exchanging punches and kicks, drawing cheers from many sons of Fenris and mortal servants. Safe Leman Russ sipped the pungent Fenrisian mead. He repeatedly examined and discussed a dagger meticulously crafted from a sea monster's tooth with Ulrich the Slayer and Angel Stormcaller, the rune priest, beside him. As for the Primarch Leman Russ, after responding to a dozen rounds of mead from the sons of Fenris, the Mortarian's kidney stone within his body quickly began to operate, instantly shattering his originally tipsy and wonderful state. Therefore, unable to resist feeling a trace of depression, he could only consume large amounts of the delicious roasted meat. At the same time, he engaged in meaningless chatter with Bjorn the Fell-Handed, who was looking down at the surrounding wolf cubs, seemingly radiating an aura of kindness. About 7 or 8 Fenrisian hours later, this incredibly lively welcome feast temporarily came to an end. If the sons of Fenris hadn't been afraid that their welcoming behavior was too enthusiastic and might cause the Primarch to feel disgusted and unhappy, then the entire feast might have lasted for days and nights. Afterward, Leman Russ and his companions were arranged by the sons of Fenris into a palace with a decent environment. Bjorn the Fell-Handed had originally wanted the Primarch Leman Russ to go to the sleeping quarters that once belonged to Leman Russ the Wolf King to rest, but the Primarch Leman Russ refused without hesitation. Now, standing inside the palace where the surrounding environment had gradually quieted down, Leman Russ and his companions exchanged glances, and after completely relaxing, they couldn't help but exhale a breath of air. When the Primarch Leman Russ, clad in a vibranium power armor, gradually awoke from his slumber, he immediately saw the ground not far away. Safe Leman Russ was personally dismantling and repairing a set of master-crafted power armor, and the Space Wolf Leman Russ, wearing a Fenrisian robe, was wielding a frost great axe back and forth in his palm, exercising his body. The Primarch Leman Russ slowly activated his vibranium power armor and got up. He first greeted the two of them, and then joined in the dismantling and repairing of the power armor. In fact, among the three of them present, only Safe Leman Russ truly mastered the hands-on ability to repair power armor. The Space Wolf Leman Russ was because he didn't have the conditions, and basically, all his stat points were on physique and strength, and he didn't have much of a brain at all. As for the Primarch Leman Russ, it was because he had too good of conditions, so there was no need to often do it himself. Soon after, the master-crafted power armor, which had almost completely replaced various servo parts and ceramite outer shells, was put back on the Space Wolf Leman Russ's body. When the Space Wolf Leman Russ was about to call the other two to leave the palace, the Primarch Leman Russ, who was sitting on the side, suddenly said, "Since there are no special circumstances happening at the moment, and we are all here, why don't you join me in a simulation?" Regarding the Primarch Leman Russ's words, Safe Leman Russ, after pondering for a moment, agreed with the other party's idea while cleaning the dirt on his ceramite palm. The Space Wolf Leman Russ, who casually carried the Frost Great Axe behind his power backpack, naturally had no objections either. So, Leman Russ nodded slowly and reached out from the storage page to take out 3 palm-sized thrown gelt, handing them to the other two. "Although I have already tried it once with David before, I don't know what will happen when the 3 of us are together, but the most basic point is that I think the difficulty of the simulation training will definitely increase a lot. Of course, if the 3 of us are not together, it probably won't be that difficult, right?" At this moment, the Primarch Leman Russ, whose gaze swept back and forth over his brothers, said lightly. As soon as his voice fell, the Space Wolf Leman Russ, who was cautiously pinching the thrown gelt in a ceramite palm, bared his teeth and said, "Who cares about the difficulty, anyway? We won't really die in the simulation training, it's just a matter of killing someone or chopping a few. I just hope the Emperor can give me an equipment or ability to store supplies, otherwise, how can I rebuild the 13th Great Company? I haven't even gotten a spaceship of my own yet." However, as soon as the Space Wolf Leman Russ's voice fell, Safe Leman Russ, who was driving the power armor and sitting on the side, said without even raising his head, "Wolf Cub, stop complaining. If you really want a mobile base, Then after things here are dealt with, why not continue to come with me for a trip? I've been coveting Huron Blackheart's Blackstone Fortress for many years, why not try to snatch it? Dear brother, I really like your idea. The space wolf Leman Russ's eyes lit up, and he quickly nodded and said. The Primarch Leman Russ, who took a deep breath, immediately spoke out. All right, stop talking nonsense, let's prepare to start, remember to throw the throne geld up at the same time. Aia, I know, you're so long-winded. Simulation starting. Current possessed identities. Rogel Dorn Space Wolf 13th Great Company Fenris Rogel Dorn Lord Cypher Fenris. Current companions. Rogel Dorn Lord Cypher Normal Rogel Dorn Space Wolf Normal. Please select descent identity and companion first. If refused, descent will be random. Identity selection refused, companion descent selected. Simulation restarting. You are already in the Warhammer universe, random descent time and location will be selected for you. Time, M41, 999. Location, Cadian Gate. You have successfully descended to a barren area filled with mysterious blackstone and ordinary rocks. You quickly opened your eyes. You are still wearing adamantium power armor of a pale gold color. In your palm, you are also gripping a blood scythe encircled by green light and a forge breaker warhammer entwined with arc lightning. Just then, before you could turn your gaze to carefully observe the strange surroundings, you heard an incredibly familiar mechanical voice in your ear. Primarch of humanity, long time no see. As soon as the other party finished speaking, you violently drove the adamantium power armor to turn around, and metallic 10 rings imbued with purple light, accompanied by a sudden buzzing sound, rumbled towards the direction the voice came from. However, the next second, layers of stasis fields constantly blooming open frozen those metallic 10 rings emitting a low buzz in midair. Immediately afterwards, Trazyn, gripping the empathic obliterator staff in a metallic hand, slowly moved a metallic skeleton body out of the nearby rock shadow. The last time, in order to escape, you deliberately destroyed a large portion of my collection, causing me to expend great effort to clean up that mess. How do you think we should settle this debt? At this moment, a faint green light seemed to flicker in the depths of Trazyn's empty, deep eye sockets. You subconsciously tightened your grip on the blood scythe and the forge breaker warhammer in your palms. The soulstone on your skull helmet flickered with a fleeting bright light, seeming as if psycho-reactive rays were about to be emitted in the next second. However, at this moment, you chose to quickly remove the skull helmet covering your entire head, completely revealing your bronze-colored face. You deeply inhaled the thin air here with a slightly frowned brow, and slowly said to the other party. Trazyn, since you didn't immediately try to control me, that means the losses I caused you are probably not as important as the deal I originally reached with you. And upon hearing your words, Trazyn seemed to reveal a hint of appreciation for the attitude you had just displayed, and it slightly shook its metallic head and said, truly a cunning and treacherous Primarch of humanity, I really want to collect you and slowly appreciate and play with you, but alas. Then I'll ask you one more time, Primarch of humanity, does the agreement that you and I reached before still count? Do you know how long I've been looking for you? You haven't appeared in any of the major territories of the human empire. At this moment, you heard Trazyn's slightly frustrated complaint. You pulled at the corner of your mouth with a slightly embarrassed expression. You originally had no intention of fulfilling the transaction and agreement with the other party, and because you led the Legion fleet on a long-term cruise in the Empire's outer star regions, Trazyn couldn't find any trace of you for a while. But now, on the one hand, you were accidentally blocked in place, forcing you to make a decision, and on the other hand, you were also developing some interest in the transaction itself. You slowly covered your entire head with the skull helmet again. You heavily inserted the metallic handle of the blood scythe into the ground, and raised an adamantium hand to gently touch the soulstone on your forehead. In an instant, a strange energy completely different from psychic energy bloomed slightly in midair, also causing Trazyn, who had been staring at you, to subconsciously exclaim. What is this thing? The galaxy actually possesses such wonderful things. The other party murmured to themselves. This is one of the Infinity Stones I told you about, a manifestation of the laws from another universe. Currently, I have 2 in my possession, and only when all 6 are gathered can they exert their true power. Trazyn, if our transaction can continue, do you think you can pay the corresponding price? You took a deep breath, and slowly said in a low voice full of endless temptation. Tell me, what do you want? My collection can be selected by you without any limit on quantity. Damn it, you really easily grasped my weakness, and it's also fortunate that you just took out something that can prove some things, otherwise I would have filled your entire brain with mintshackle scarabs. At this moment, Trazyn, who heavily hammered the rocky ground with the empathic obliterator staff in his palm, said to you in a gritted tone. Primarch of humanity, I can tell you clearly that although I am just a Necron overlord who likes to collect all things in the world, I still belong to the Necron race itself. For the means and methods that can allow the Necron race to regain their bodies and souls, I will try at all costs. So, you better not deceive me again. Speaking of which, you wouldn't want to be chased around by the Silent King's Necron army in the future, would you? He's not like me, who can calmly discuss conditions with you. As soon as Trazyn's words fell, you, who were pondering, slightly shook your skull helmet. You drove the adamantium power armor to walk towards the other party. One of your adamantium hands and Trazyn's metallic hand slowly grasped together. After a period of conversation between you, you officially reached an agreement and transaction that could help each other. That is to say, Trazyn himself will truly join your side as an alien advisor, and you must shoulder the responsibility of finding ways and means to transform the Necron race's bodies. But at the same time, wherever you are present, all of Trazyn's power will become a great help to you, and not just trading those Imperial troops who become collectibles. Not long after, you and Trazyn stood side by side in place. By the way, Trazyn, do you know where this is? Have you seen any Astartes who look similar to me? You casually asked the other party. And Trazyn slightly turned his metallic head, and he stared at you with a look as if you were an idiot. You dare to descend randomly without knowing anything, human Primarch. No wonder you dared to make trouble in my tomb world before. Don't you know? This is Cadia, and Abaddon the Despoiler, the Warmaster of Chaos who is carrying out the 13th Black Crusade, has heavily surrounded your Imperial side. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Trazyn's words had barely faded. You took a deep breath behind your skull helmet, the drawn-out inhale causing him to glance sideways. The 13th Black Crusade was undoubtedly Abaddon the Despoiler's most successful. Gathering a vast host of chaos forces, he reduced the Cadian Gate, which guarded the Eye of Terror, and trillions of Imperial soldiers to historical dust. Ultimately, this led to the emergence of the Great Rift, stretching across the entire Imperial domain. Now, you were pondering whether it was possible to alter Cadia's fate to some extent, or at the very least, preserve more of the Imperial forces. Your gaze shifted slightly, focusing on Trazyn's metallic form. Without hesitation, you extended a vibranium hand towards him, requesting more reinforcements from him. Trazyn, who was already there to support the Imperium, didn't say much. Wielding the empathic obliterator, he immediately led you towards the depths of the passage ahead. You instantly realized that this place was an extremely spacious underground cave. After you passed through a series of winding and long dark tunnels, you could faintly hear the rumbling vibrations coming from the thick ground above. You and Trazyn deliberately chose a larger underground cave as a place to stop. At that moment, Trazyn, shaking his metallic head slightly, began to produce a series of tesseract labyrinths in front of you. In the next second, a custodian in golden armor wielding a power spear, and a dozen large-sized salamanders Astartes appeared in your field of vision. The custodian, who had just landed on the rocky ground, first stared at Trazyn, then fixed his gaze on you, clad in vibranium power armor. However, before you could identify yourself as a Primarch, the custodian wielding the power spear immediately launched a fierce attack in your direction. You shook your skull helmet helplessly. As you raised a vibranium hand, a series of buzzing metal 10 rings suddenly shot through the air, blasting the custodian away. At the same time, the dozen salamanders Astartes, who had just been released from stasis, heard your low voice simply stating your Primarch identity. You could clearly see the salamanders were visibly stunned, and then these Astartes, without any hesitation, activated their power armor and stood beside you, although the barrels of their bolters were intentionally or unintentionally aimed at Trazyn's direction. Immediately afterwards, with Trazyn's further generosity, approximately a company's worth of ultramarines appeared before everyone. From Trazyn's slowly resounding mechanical voice, you also unexpectedly learned that this was an ultramarines company from the Horus Heresy era. You immediately activated your vibranium power armor and stepped forward, quickly engaging in a brief conversation with the ultramarines company captain, who was still wary of the surrounding environment and the mysterious alien. You painstakingly gained the trust of this group of ultramarines, and also temporarily convinced them of your identity as a Primarch. However, what Trazyn released from the Tesseract Labyrinth next was a lithe female Inquisitor and her human followers, a stormtrooper regiment of the Aquila Guard. However, as soon as she emerged from stasis, she coldly glanced around before immediately launching into a tirade against Trazyn, even re-raising her bolt pistol. The many mortal warriors surrounding the female Inquisitor also unhesitatingly raised their lost weapons towards Trazyn and the Astartes. You had to activate your vibranium power armor and step forward once again. While revealing your Primarch identity to the female Inquisitor, you also indirectly explained the current time and location to everyone around, as well as the ongoing, intense battle. Finally, the female Inquisitor named Grifax decided to temporarily abandon settling accounts with Trazyn for your sake as a Primarch, and slowly lowered the bolt pistol in her hand. At this moment, Trazyn, whose metallic eye sockets were flashing with a faint green light, suddenly stopped releasing his collection. Wielding the empathic obliterator, he came to your side under the silent gaze of many Astartes and mortal warriors. Human Primarch, time is too short. Abaddon the Despoiler has relaunched a fierce attack on the ground of Cadia. I must assist Archmagos Belisarius' call in activating the Blackstone pylons inside Cadia, thereby suppressing the rampant spread of chaos energy. Now, you humans should do what you are good at. Please remember the transaction and agreement between us. After this war is over, my projection will find a way to find you. Trazyn's words had barely faded. He turned and moved more quickly towards the depths of the underground tunnel. After silently staring at the surrounding Astartes and mortal warriors, you slowly raised a vibranium hand. You extracted a large number of weapons and ammunition from the storage interface and quickly piled them in front of everyone. I know that you are full of doubts and suspicions about my Primarch identity and the current environment, but the dire situation the Imperium is currently facing no longer allows me to slowly explain everything to you. Astartes and mortal warriors, all brothers and sisters who belong to humanity, are you willing to join me in this battle to save the Cadian Gate? We are willing. For the Emperor. At this moment, whether it was Inquisitor Grifax and her Aquila Guard, or the Astartes from the Ultramarines and Salamanders. The crowd who let out low roars stepped forward. They quickly gathered a large amount of ammunition and carried many heavy firepower weapons. You took a deep breath, activating the vibranium power armor and stepping forward. You took an ancient and solemn Imperial Aquila banner from a standard bearer of the Ultramarines Company. You casually used the sharp edge of the Blood Reaver to cut through a vibranium hand, continuously splashing strands of pale golden blood flowing from your palm onto the surface of the Imperial banner. In an instant, as the golden flames suddenly burst into flames on the slightly shaking Imperial banner, any mortals and Astartes around who still had doubts about your Primarch identity instantly understood everything. The custodian wielding the power spear, who was standing at the rear of the crowd, also knelt on one knee in your direction with a slightly annoyed expression, acknowledging your identity as a son of the Emperor. Come, let us go save Cadia. You raised the Emperor's banner burning in your palm, and shouted in a deep voice to everyone around you. You firmly fastened the Emperor's blood banner, now ablaze, to the back of your jump pack, and transformed the more conspicuous adamantium wings into propulsion devices. You stood at the forefront, gripping the blood-soaked scythe wreathed in green light and the breaker of Forge's warhammer entwined with lightning. You led the nearly fully armed Astartes and mortal warriors in a swift charge towards the entrance of the underground cave. However, when you and your group, enduring the increasingly deafening and terrifying sounds of artillery fire, finally stepped onto the surface, the vast battlefield that suddenly unfolded before everyone's eyes caused even you, the well-traveled Primarch, to pause slightly. At this very moment, on this immense plain stretching as far as the eye could see, countless, densely packed cultists and rebels, along with chaos demons from the legions of the four gods, were rampaging across the ground. Numerous Chaos Astartes from the Black Legion, in combat squads, were covering large numbers of Chaos tanks or demon engines as they surged back and forth through the teeming masses. Further away, the god machines of the Adeptus Mechanicus, leading the agile House Tyrannus Knights, were struggling to withstand the relentless Chaos artillery fire. The flickering void shields on the Warlord Titans and Knight suits indicated the directness of the battle. Above, in the smoke-filled sky, squadrons of Cadian Thunderhawk gunships were either being precisely shot down by the Chaos Legion's god machines or heavily surrounded by rapidly ascending anti-aircraft weaponry. These sky warriors, showing no sign of retreat, launched wave after wave of suicidal attacks against the seemingly endless Chaos enemies, using the Thunderhawk's lascannons, heavy bombs, or even the depleted gunships themselves. At this moment, you, wearing the skull helmet, couldn't help but take a deep breath. You abruptly raised an adamantium hand tightly gripping the blood-soaked scythe. The next second, 30 Leman Russ tanks and 5 Land Raiders materialized out of thin air around your group, their rumbling metal treads landing heavily on the ground, digging into the earth. Inquisitor Grifax, standing nearby, reacted swiftly. Clutching her bolt pistol, she immediately called for the storm troopers from the Eagle Warriors, those most skilled in piloting vehicles, to rush inside. And with the roar of the heavy vehicles, engines starting up and the terrifying artillery fire constantly erupting from the depths of the gun barrels, you, standing atop the jump pack with the burning Emperor's blood banner raised high, quickly attracted the attention of a large number of Chaos demons and even Chaos Astartes Iron Warriors. After a brief pause, they charged towards your position without hesitation. Boom boom boom. Instantly, whirlwind missile strikes and storm bolter fire from the Ultramarines company rained down on the advancing, shield-bearing Iron Warriors at maximum speed. A dozen Fire Hawks Astartes also stood before you, using their favored flamethrowers to relentlessly incinerate the swarming Chaos demons. At the same time, with Inquisitor Grifax's slightly sharp command voice, the Leman Russ tanks and Land Raiders, arranged in a line with their metal treads rumbling, began to cover the Eagle Warriors, the most numerous, as they unleashed volley after volley of lascannon fire against the endless Chaos enemies. At this moment, you suddenly turned your head and gazed at the custodian guard who had just taken his place beside you, wielding a power spear. You nodded heavily to him. You too, with remarkable understanding, activated your power armor and launched an astonishing charge towards the steadily advancing Iron Warriors and Chaos demons. Rumble. You swung the blood-soaked scythe in your hand forward with all your might, rapidly slicing a large swarm of bloodletters and nurglings into a storm of flying flesh and gore. With your other hand, you swung the breaker of Forge's warhammer, shattering an extremely thick boarding shield and slamming an Iron Warrior charging with a bolter into the ground. At the same time, the custodian guard, wielding his power spear, moved around you with incredibly agile steps, each thrust of his spear piercing the metal helmet or chest armor of an Iron Warrior, using his martial skills honed over countless years to prevent any Chaos Astartes from flanking you. The next moment, without hesitation, you manipulated the metal chakrams that suddenly leapt into the air, unleashing a metallic spiral storm like a meat grinder upon the surrounding Chaos demons. And perhaps it was the wind fueling the fire, or a small blessing from the Emperor. The Emperor's blood banner burning fiercely behind your jump pack actually emitted wisps of golden flame, continuously scorching large numbers of Chaos demons. Just then, your keen ears suddenly picked up the angry roars of the Korndaemunken. You abruptly turned, your skull helmet covered in thick bloodstains. You immediately saw, several kilometers away, surrounded by countless Chaos cultists, a group of Chaos Astartes from the Blood Hand Warband charging towards you with terrifying momentum, shouting, "Traitor!" You took a deep breath. You forcefully used the psychic gem located on your skull helmet to unleash a continuous stream of psychic energy towards the charging Chaos Astartes. Instantly, a brilliant beam of light that swept across a significant portion of the battlefield either bisected or pierced the chests of dozens of Chaos Astartes wielding chain weapons. However, just as you thought you could temporarily alleviate some of the combat pressure, across the entire vast battlefield of the plane, every Chaos demon belonging to the four gods seemed to receive a new command. They would even temporarily abandon their current targets, enduring significant losses in combat strength, to forcibly disengage and desperately converge on your location. But at the same time, many Astartes chapters and mortal forces belonging to the Imperium noticed the arrival of your reinforcements. Especially the Space Wolves, great companies of Ironwolves and Bloodhowl, and the Black Templars led by Marshal Amalrich, seemed to sense something. These Astartes, roaring upwards, unleashed a battle will in strength far exceeding their previous levels, gathering their already dwindling numbers and constantly pushing towards your position amidst the encirclement of numerous Chaos forces. You and the exceptionally skilled Custodian Guard are advancing through the tide of Chaos demons. With each step forward, several Chaos Astartes or entire swaths of Chaos demons fall as victims to your hands. Meanwhile, the Ultramarines Company and the Salamanders are following closely behind. After suffering considerable casualties, they successfully leverage the terrifying firepower of their heavy weaponry to shield Inquisitor Grifax and the Eagle warriors under her command, facilitating their continued advance. At this moment, dozens of Leman Russ tanks and land raiders, their engines roaring fiercely, are gradually exhausting their internal ammunition reserves. They abruptly increase their power, forcefully charging into the deeper regions of the demon tide. Utilizing their irresistible weight and the back and forth grinding of their metal treads, they repeatedly crush countless Chaos demons, alleviating the immense pressure from the battlefield for the heavily wounded mortal soldiers and Astartes around them. Simultaneously, the psychic gem on your skull helmet has not ceased emitting psychic rays for a moment. Continuous beams of psychic energy, like sharp cutting lasers, relentlessly pierce and obliterate the ceaselessly surging Chaos demons. And each time you vigorously swing the blood scythe and the forgebreaker, wisps of golden flame from the burning Emperor's blood banner gradually envelop the edges of the weapons. These golden flames, akin to the ultimate bane for Chaos demons, allow you to repeatedly clear large areas within the endless horde of Chaos demons. They also enable you to seamlessly coordinate with the Custodian Guard beside you, continuously striking down those Chaos Astartes attempting to launch counterattacks. However, as an increasing number of Chaos demons assail you once more, even with your ability to counteract chaos, coupled with your and the Custodian Guard's highly synchronized combat coordination, your advance gradually slows down. You and your comrade are even forced to temporarily halt in place, desperately wielding the weapons in your hands to withstand the fierce onslaught from countless Chaos demons. As for the mortal soldiers and Astartes who have been following behind you, their casualty situation has become increasingly severe. The entire company of Ultramarines is reduced to fewer than 40 individuals, and with each passing moment, unfortunate Astartes fall heavily in death. The remaining 5 Salamanders Astartes relentlessly swing the powerful power hammers in their hands, constantly preventing Chaos demons from ambushing and surrounding the heavy vehicles. Besides the crew members inside the heavy vehicles, there are basically no surviving mortal soldiers within sight of Inquisitor Grifax's Eagle warriors. Thump, thump, thump. Just then, accompanied by the demon tide's rear constantly scattering demon remains and agonizing roars. The heavy footsteps of numerous Astartes sprinting at full speed even briefly drown out the incessant roar of artillery fire. A Black Templar's fighting force, personally led by Marshal Amalrich, swiftly tears through the massive encirclement formed by countless Chaos demons. These Black Templars, with their extremely resolute fighting spirit and unparalleled devout faith, relentlessly wield the power weapons in their hands. They repeatedly hack and slash at the Chaos Demons before them, as well as the occasional Chaos Astartes, charging towards your location with an indomitable stance. At this moment, as many Black Templars approach within several hundred meters of you, wisps of golden flame from the burning Emperor's blood banner rapidly envelop their power weapons as well. This undoubtedly grants the Black Templars an even greater boost in combat ability, making their efficiency in slaughtering and hacking Chaos Demons even more astonishing. At this moment, you and Black Templars Marshal Amalrich, who are ceaselessly wielding melee weapons within the demon tide, inadvertently brush past each other. You slightly nod your skull helmet towards him, then turn your head to fire devastating psychic rays. While the emotionally charged Amalrich abruptly raises the power sword in his hand, issuing a resounding, deep battle cry to everyone present. Black Templars, show no pity, feel no remorse, fear nothing. Instantly, all Astartes who heard this battle cry quickly reacted. They rapidly converge around you, forming a tightly packed assault formation. Without any hesitation, you lead the troops, whose morale and combat power are continuously rising, in an even more astonishing charge against the Chaos Demon tide ahead. And the remaining dozen or so heavy vehicles, under the command of Inquisitor Grifax, begin to race back and forth around the edges of your assault formation, constantly dispersing the fierce attacks and ambushes from the Chaos Demons. Soon after, the great company of the Space Wolves, the Bloodhowl, and the Iron Wolves also break through the heavily besieged Chaos Demon tide and successfully join your assault formation. These sons of Fenris, who quickly sensed the connection of their Primarch's bloodline, subconsciously unleashed bursts of sky-rending howls and roars. Once wisps of golden flame from the burning Emperor's blood banner also envelop their power weapons, the Space Wolves, whose slaughter efficiency has greatly increased, also become an indispensable presence in the assault formation. At this moment, you are exerting your inspirational role as a Primarch. As long as you are still fighting and slaughtering, without easily falling, you can continuously boost the fighting morale of all Astartes on the battlefield, and even amplify their combat abilities. However, at this moment, just as the massive assault formation formed by all of you forcefully breaks through the encirclement and obstruction of countless Chaos Demons, and as you follow Marshal Amalrich's guidance, beginning to change direction and charge towards the location of the Imperial lines, your skull helmet's optics suddenly capture the conspicuous figure of the newly ascended Demon Prince, the Destroyer Lord Krathos, and his Abaddon's Black Legion warband. You subconsciously grip the blood scythe, stained with demon blood, and the Forgebreaker, constantly unleashing arcs of lightning. Your towering frame abruptly activates the propulsion systems on the back of the adamantium power armor. In a low-altitude flight posture far exceeding the speed of a charge, you rapidly collide head-on with the onrushing Demon Prince. At the same time, in another part of the Void battlefield, the situation was equally intense. The Black Legion's Black Fortress, the Eternal Will, was enduring a fierce assault from the Imperial Fist's Iron Fortress, the Mountain Array. Meanwhile, the vast Adeptus Mechanicus fleet belonging to Archmagos Belisarius Cawl had also entered the interior of the Void battlefield, constantly unleashing countless weapon arrays from within its ships. In an instant, beams of laser light and powerful, brilliant light lances, almost completely obscuring the Void battlefield, were fired from the Imperial ships, heavily bombarding the already crumbling Void shields of the Black Fortress, Eternal Will. As many Black Legion ships orbiting Cadia were unable to withstand the terrifying firepower from the Mountain Array and the Adeptus Mechanicus fleet and were rapidly torn apart into massive, exploding metal wreckage. Ultimately, the Void shield of the Black Fortress, Eternal Will, completely overloaded, and it too became one of the massive shipwrecks rapidly collapsing and being destroyed in the frigid Void battlefield. The next moment, on the surface of Cadia, where the fighting was becoming increasingly fierce, several squads of Astartes from the Imperial Fist's Third Company, as well as numerous members of the Culexus Assassinorum, their bodies wreathed in terrifying psychic flames. led by a tall figure bearing a frost axe on his heavy shoulder plate, were quickly teleported into the heart of the ground battlefield, amidst the flying artillery fire. As soon as they landed, the group wasted no time, immediately launching a fierce offensive and counterattack against the Chaos enemies within their line of sight. For the Culexus Assassinorum, who had no regard for casualties, this was a near-perfect battlefield. However, the strangest thing was that, as the tall figure, currently launching a terrifying charge against a large number of Chaos demons, continued to swing the frost axe in his hand, sweeping away all enemies around him. The Khorne demons, who had originally swarmed forward, instantly reversed the direction of their weapon strikes, launching even fiercer attacks against other Chaos demons or Chaos Astartes beside them. Even when they were jointly attacked by the Imperium or Chaos allies, the Khorne demons showed no signs of returning to normal. Meanwhile, in a corner of the chaotic battlefield, around the wreckage of a cruiser, half of which was emitting thick smoke and exploding flames, a squad of Dark Angels from the 4th Company had suffered heavy losses. Just as they were enduring repeated attacks from a large number of Chaos Astartes and cultists, a group of Battle Sisters from the Order of the Martyred Lady seemed to appear out of thin air, arriving around the battlefield and quickly launching a swift and effective support action for the Dark Angels. However, behind those Battle Sisters who were constantly waving power weapons that unleashed disruption fields, while continuously pulling the triggers of their bolt guns. A tall figure, cloaked in a white hood, with a bandaged greatsword strapped to the back of his power pack, moved with silent and agile steps, completely concealing his extremely conspicuous figure, and disappeared into the encirclement of numerous cultists and Chaos demons, as if he had never been there. Boom boom boom. At this moment, a deep roar suddenly erupted from within your skull helmet. Maintaining your flight, you were forced to land heavily to avoid the terrifying laser cannon fire coming head-on. Without any hesitation, you activated the Shadow Step, driving the adamantium power armor, covered in demon blood. Your tall body, still in mid-air, instantly transformed into wisps of black shadow. You gripped the blood scythe and the breaker maul tightly in your palms, and like a phantom, you unleashed a continuous, frenzied assault around the demon prince or Krathos. The next second, as one of your mag-locked boots touched down, your thick arm, rotating violently, had already brought the blood scythe crashing down. The demon prince or Krathos, who was charging head-on, also abruptly raised the demon weapon in his palm, intending to parry and counterattack. However, an extremely sharp spearhead suddenly cut through the air, emitting a piercing whistling sound. The power spear, held tightly in the custodian's hand, pierced deeply through the demon prince or Krathos's heavy chest armor at a stabbing speed that was difficult to capture with the naked eye. At the same time, before the demon prince, who had just suffered a swift sneak attack from the custodian, could let out an uncontrollable roar of anger. The blood scythe in your palm had already been embedded diagonally into the opponent's tall body from the shoulder plate, almost instantly splitting the black Terminator armor and the Chaos flesh beneath it in two. Rumble. After the breaker maul in your other palm, wrapped in crackling lightning, brutally smashed the demon prince or Krathos's entire head. In just a few exchanges, the demon prince or Krathos, one of Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's chosen, had unfortunately become your defeated foe. Rumble rumble. Just then, a deafening roar from the direction of the Imperial lines caused you to quickly rotate your skull helmet. Through your visor, you instantly saw that a section of the heavy city wall surrounding Kraft's Bastion, the only remaining massive defensive position on the surface of Cadia, was rapidly collapsing. Several Hellchurches, desperately coordinating with countless cultists and Chaos demons in their attack, caused a large number of mortal warriors and a company from the Nova Marines chapter to be completely annihilated in an instant. If it weren't for the sudden surge of even greater numbers of Cadian Whiteshields and Khazarkan shock troops from within the defensive position, and their unwavering fighting spirit, at the cost of disregard for casualties, had forcibly halted the Chaos enemies in their tracks and even gradually pushed them back, then Cadia's only Imperial stronghold would have been in grave danger of falling in an instant. At that moment, you shook your skull helmet, covered in demon blood, vigorously. Without any hesitation, you raised an adamantium hand, tightly gripping the blood scythe, and pointed out the direction of continued advance for those behind you who were still fiercely battling the remaining Chaos Astartes of the Hound of War warband. However, just as you were about to stride forward with your mag-locked boots to launch a charge, you suddenly heard a female chanting sound that seemed to echo from the depths of your soul. As your gaze shifted back and forth, you finally discovered, at a battlefield location several kilometers away, a warp gate that had just appeared on the chaotic battlefield, as well as approximately 5 companies of battle sisters. At the same time, a lithe figure with a pair of massive pure white wings extending from the back of her power pack, wearing a suit of golden sister of battle power armor, and wielding a blade of fervor wrapped in golden light, quickly appeared within your field of vision. It was the Emperor's divine avatar, the true living saint of the Imperium of Man, Saint Celestine. At this moment, as the living saint, Saint Celestine, descended with a thunderous roar upon the Cadian battlefield. All the mortal warriors and Astartes belonging to the Imperium clearly felt strands of golden light from the Emperor shining upon their battered and weary bodies. They all subconsciously tightened their grip on their damaged weapons, and in the depths of their numb eyes, a faint flame of loyalty and hope seemed to ignite. For the Emperor, you heard waves of impassioned battle cries rising and falling, echoing across the entire battlefield. You slightly shook your skull helmet, stained with demon blood. Your gaze inadvertently met the living saint, Saint Celestine, as she flapped her pure white wings and ascended into the air. Her fair face seemed to show you a warm smile full of care and compassion. You also suddenly noticed that the living saint, Saint Celestine, with her short black hair dancing in the wind, seemed to possess a pair of beautiful purple eyes. They seemed to be a pair of purple eyes that you had always stored deep within your memories, impossible to forget. You subconsciously took a deep breath, and one of your mag boots couldn't help but take a step forward. However, at this moment, accompanied by the roaring and conspicuous figures of 3 giant demon engine skull lords, another wave of surging chaos enemies forcibly blocked your path. You quickly gathered your somewhat scattered and resilient mind, and once again entered a state of cold and ruthless combat. Buzz buzz buzz. One after another, purple light shimmering, buzzing metal rings suddenly cut through the smoke-filled air, rapidly forming a metal spiral storm like a meat grinder in front of you, fiercely sweeping towards those ubiquitous chaos demons and cultists. You quickly rotated your skull helmet, scanning the intense battle situation around you. You immediately raised your adamantium hand, tightly gripping the blood scythe, and without any hesitation, issued orders to Marshal Amori and the others to head to the Imperial lines and provide support. You abruptly activated the adamantium power armor, with golden flames swirling around your body. The burning Imperial banner was fluttering in the wind above your power pack. You alone rushed swiftly towards the nearby Sisters of Battle, who were fiercely battling the giant demon engine skull lords, to provide support. Sizzle sizzle sizzle. A continuous beam of psychic energy suddenly erupted from your skull helmet. The brilliant beam quickly struck a massive demon engine skull lord, attempting to draw its attention. As the psychic energy continued to impact, the broken corpses and fresh skulls piled on top of the massive vehicle's chassis began to fall and be destroyed, and even the cornate cleaver, mounted on one of its huge arms and swung back and forth, paused slightly. You temporarily bought the heavily casualties Sisters of Battle a moment to breathe. They immediately reorganized their ranks, seeking a way to completely destroy the giant demon engine. The distance between you and a skull lord was constantly decreasing. Strands of golden flame from the burning Imperial banner quickly enveloped the opponent's massive body. As the golden flames permeated the blood-red armor, they also repeatedly scorched the chaos demons inside the giant engine. In an instant, as if having suffered some kind of fatal blow, the skull lord abruptly turned the metal treads beneath its burning body, and the demon blood cannon located between the opponent's chest and abdomen unleashed an even more violent barrage without any restraint. You witnessed firsthand many Sisters of Battle who attempted to launch a fierce charge against the skull lord being evaporated into a miserable state, leaving only their power armor behind by the boiling warp energy. Even those Sisters of Battle who successfully defended against the demon blood cannon's bombardment instantly entered a severely injured state, unable to rise. You subconsciously tightened your grip on the blood scythe and the breaker battle hammer in your hands. You abruptly controlled the propulsion device behind your adamantium power armor, launching a flying charge towards the burning Skull Lord. The breaker battle hammer in your hand, wrapped in strands of lightning, heavily struck the Skull Lord's metal helmet, also causing the opponent's still raging demon blood cannon to completely shut down. The blood scythe in your other hand suddenly swept forward, almost instantly cleaving off the massive head of this giant demon-engined Skull Lord. Rumble, rumble, rumble. However, at this moment, the demon blood cannon from another giant demon-engined Skull Lord hit you with unparalleled accuracy while you were still suspended in midair. In an instant, seemingly endless boiling warp energy relentlessly permeated the inside of your adamantium power armor, constantly evaporating the flesh and bones within your towering body. Ah! You couldn't help but let out a deep roar that echoed around from inside your skull helmet, and your entire body crashed heavily towards the ground. Just at this moment, as your consciousness began to blur, you suddenly felt strands of warm golden light penetrating your adamantium power armor, slowly shining inside your body. The Emperor's psychic light was constantly dispelling the boiling warp energy, while also rapidly healing all the injuries within your body. Your consciousness swiftly cleared. You slightly rotated your skull helmet. Through strands of black hair brushing against the top of your skull mask, your gaze clearly saw that fair, unfamiliar face, as well as those familiar purple eyes. You discovered that your entire towering body was being gently held in the arms of the living saint, Saint Celestine, and her constantly flapping pure white wings occasionally brushed past the corner of your eye. The next moment, when her mag boots heavily landed, and after your entire towering body was gently placed on the pitted ground by her, you couldn't help but activate your adamantium power armor to prop up your towering body, kneeling on one knee, and one of your adamantium hands, releasing the blood scythe, grabbed the living saint, Saint Celestine's metal hand. "Wait, are you?" you asked the other party in a low voice. Your two strong hearts were beating incredibly fiercely. "Honored Primarch, I am not the person you wish to see. However, someone did want me to give you a belated gift." The living saint, Saint Celestine, with a compassionate and caring smile on her fair face, suddenly raised her other metal hand. She passed a string of rosary beads, tightly wrapped around her metal arm, through the hand that you had been tightly gripping, gently wrapping them around your adamantium arm. "Is she, all right?" Your gaze stared fixedly at the string of rosary beads radiating a beautiful light, and you asked the living saint in front of you again in a low voice. At this moment, through the gap between you and the living saint, the few remaining sisters of battle in the distance, carrying melta bombs, resolutely launched a death charge towards the two giant demon-engined skull lords. Between the Imperial defense lines a little further away, countless roaring mortal warriors and battered Astartes were struggling to resist the repeated attacks of the Chaos Demons. And with the roar of artillery fire that seemed to have never ceased on the sky and ground. On the more distant chaotic battlefield, a large number of burning contorted epitome were charging wildly through the Chaos Army, and many colossal engines of war on the verge of collapse also began to engage in a final battle to the death. Just at this moment, the living saint, Saint Celestine, whose fair face always seemed to maintain a compassionate smile, gently broke free from the metal hand that you were tightly gripping. She slowly placed her other metal hand on the side of your lowered skull helmet, gently using force to lift your head, and said to you in a gentle tone, "Primarch, she wants to tell you that she is well, everything is well. But the current Imperium of man and the battlefield situation cannot tolerate the slightest sentimentality. We must shoulder the responsibilities and expectations that the Emperor has given us. So, stand up, Primarch, you need to lead all of us to continue fighting. For the Imperium of man, stand up." You slowly exhaled inside the skull helmet. The two resilient hearts within your chest gradually returned to their normal beating speed. You abruptly activated the vibranium-powered armor, rising from the ground. The massive vibranium wings, having just transformed from propulsion devices, unfolded outward from behind your broad back. Through the helmet's visor, your gaze lingered on the smiling, pale face of the living Saint Celestine and her deep purple eyes. You nodded slightly in acknowledgement. You subconsciously tightened your grip on the metal handle of the blood side with your vibranium hand, which was entwined with rosary beads, while the furnace breaker warhammer danced back and forth in your other hand. You swiftly manipulated the propulsion devices that had reformed behind the vibranium-powered armor, ascending into the air. Without a backward glance, you initiated a low-altitude dive towards the two colossal demon-engined skull lords that were enduring a death charge from the Battle Sisters. In the next instant, one melta-bomb after another, extracted from the storage page, was continuously airdropped around the two rampaging skull lords. Once the Battle Sisters successfully deployed several melta-mines using sacrificial tactics, quickly blasting apart the massive treaded chassis of the two skull lords. You, soaring back and forth in the air, detonated all the melta-bombs without hesitation. Rumble. The two giant demon-engined skull lords, trapped and unable to move, were completely engulfed layer upon layer by endless high-temperature flames and violent shockwaves. The surviving Battle Sisters, with practiced movements, rolled into the depths of the surrounding massive craters, successfully evading the aftershocks and scorching heat of the terrifying explosion. At this moment, you manipulated the propulsion devices behind the vibranium-powered armor, pausing for a moment in midair. Through the black smoke rising into the sky, you vaguely saw the living Saint Celestine, flapping her pure white wings, soaring and swooping across every battlefield. Wherever she went, countless exhausted mortal warriors and battle-scarred Astartes seemed to bathe in the golden light of the Emperor, and even their fighting spirit and low morale were restored. You began to emulate the living Saint Celestine's pattern of action. While maneuvering the light gold vibranium-powered armor, soaring and swooping through the sky, you provided overwhelming support from above to the Imperial forces on every chaotic battlefield. Wherever you went, besides the fact that your identity and bloodline as a Primarch could inspire the morale of the troops, the burning Imperial blood banner located above the power pack also greatly enhanced the combat capabilities of those around you against chaos demons and even cultists. Even if you left soon, thanks to the ubiquitous warp energy, the golden flames emanating from the burning Imperial blood banner would burn even longer out of thin air. However, at this moment, just as you and the living Saint Celestine's aerial support and massive buffs to the entire chaotic battlefield completely boosted the fighting spirit and combat abilities of countless mortal warriors and Astartes. Even forcibly prying up the chaotic scales that had never been in favor of the Imperial side. Boom boom boom. Accompanying the teleportation light that suddenly flashed across the turbid sky. Chaos Warmaster Abaddon personally led his Disciples of Despair bodyguard in a decapitation strike against the Imperial defense line. An even greater number of Black Legion Chaos Astartes also charged through the entire battlefield, leading countless Chaos armies in a more intense final assault on the Krafla bulwark. Your gaze also noticed the living Saint Celestine flapping her pure white wings, swooping swiftly and heavily towards the direction of Chaos Warmaster Abaddon. The blade of holy fire entwined with golden light in her palm collided violently with Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's demon sword Draconian, unleashing bursts of terrifying shockwaves and warp chaos energy, while also temporarily saving Lord Castellan Creed, the human Imperial commander who had just lost an arm. You abruptly activated the propulsion devices behind the vibranium-powered armor, intending to provide necessary support to the most dangerous parts of the Imperial lines. At the same time, a tall figure seemingly wrapped in strands of scarlet blood light, with a heavy frost axe on his thick shoulder armor, led many burning curse legionnaires to your rear. His expression increasingly ferocious and excited, the figure shouted loudly that he wanted to join you in the decapitation strike against Chaos Warmaster Abaddon. Buzz buzz buzz. However, at this moment, as invisible psychic suppression fields suddenly enveloped the entire chaotic battlefield and even the planet Cadia. Those Curse Legionnaire Astartes who had originally gained the upper hand in the battle instantly became blurred, and even their offensive movements became very sluggish. At the same time, countless frantically attacking chaos demons rapidly fell into an extremely weakened special state, and many weaker chaos demons were even forcibly banished back into the warp by the invisible suppression field in the blink of an eye. But what was even more deadly was that the living Saint Celestine, who was entangled in battle with Chaos Warmaster Abaddon, also became one of the victims of these invisible suppression fields. The golden power armor on her body and the blade of holy fire entwined with golden light in her palm clearly dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chaos Warmaster Abaddon, wielding the demon sword Draconian and the talon of Horus with all his might, quickly seized this opportunity. He quickly activated his Terminator armor and stepped forward, forcibly piercing the living Saint Celestine's thick armor and chest with the talon of Horus, causing a large amount of crimson blood to splatter onto those pure white wings. Abaddon. At this moment, flying rapidly in midair, it seemed as if both of your hearts skipped a beat. Even though you subconsciously knew that the living Saint Celestine would not truly die. You still couldn't help but let out an angry roar from inside the skull helmet that reverberated throughout the entire battlefield. You, like a golden meteor falling from the sky, surrounded by strands of golden flame about to be extinguished around your body, launched a terrifying and deadly charge towards Chaos Warmaster Abaddon, who slowly raised his face and revealed a sneer. Die. Boom. Your pair of magnetic boots, carrying wisps of dim flames, heavily stomped on the back of Horus's claw, which Chaos Warmaster Abaddon had abruptly raised upwards. Rogel. The expression on his face twisted hideously as he roared your name. As the magnetic boots heavily stomped the ground to steady his towering frame, he also forcefully swung the massive Horus's claw outwards. Your towering frame, clad in vibranium power armor, flipped once in midair. The propulsion devices located behind the power pack instantly transformed into a pair of vibranium wings extending outwards. Chi. Rows of abruptly erected vibranium feathers repeatedly bombarded Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's Horus's claw-like rapidly spinning, razor-sharp saw blades, also spraying out a large amount of dazzling sparks all around. The next moment, your magnetic boots heavily landed. As you strode forward, the blood scythe, tightly gripped in your palm, also swung up fiercely, hacking down towards Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's head. However, at this moment, the demon sword Draconian in Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's other palm seemed to emit a fleeting, low-pitched sneer near your ear. You instantly noticed countless agonizing faces on the massive red and blue interwoven blade emitting bursts of ear-splitting shrieks visible to the naked eye, then swiftly raised it to block the blood scythe's verdant, swirling edge. At the same time, the Warhammer, a hammer shaped like a pair of pliers, constantly unleashing strands of lightning, was also forcefully swung by you, only to be firmly gripped within Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's palm with his agile reflexes, temporarily restraining it in front of you and him. You instinctively clenched your teeth. You continuously focused the physical strength of your entire body, simultaneously driving the vibranium power armor, which hummed loudly, to engage in a head-on contest of strength with Chaos Warmaster Abaddon. At this moment, through the melee weapons of both sides, which were trembling slightly due to the stalemate, and the brilliant light of countless chaotic energies and dim flames constantly resisting annihilation, Chaos Warmaster Abaddon, his facial expression growing increasingly ferocious, suddenly shook the sky-piercing braid on top of his head. He couldn't help but widen his pair of turbid eyes, filled with the power of chaos, staring intently at you as he roared. Rogel, is this all you've got? I've been thinking about you all this time. What virtue or ability do you possess to be called brothers with my great father? You are nothing more than a lackey under the corpse emperor. A human traitor who has forsaken the blessings of the gods. Hey, from now on, the era of Primarchs is over. However, at this moment, before Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's low roar could echo in the air filled with chaotic energy, the psychic gem located above your skull helmet suddenly burst forth with a beam of brilliant, bright psychic energy. The terrifyingly scorching, brilliant beam swiftly pierced through the chaotic energy between you and him, fiercely blasting towards the center of Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's face, which was close at hand. In a flash of lightning, even though Chaos Warmaster Abaddon in front of you shook his head, performing the necessary evasive maneuvers with a reaction speed far exceeding that of an Astartes. The terrifying power of the psychic beam, no less than that of a Melta, still instantly severed and melted off one of his ears, along with a small portion of his skull, plus the sky-piercing braid on top of his head, also heavily piercing through his ancient Terminator armor. At the same time, accompanied by Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's painful roar, which was rather miserable due to the injury. A towering figure, wielding a frost great axe in both hands, also leapt up from behind your power armor, the terrifying blade flashing with cold light, crashing down towards the top of Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's ruined head. Abaddon, die, you bastard. However, at this moment, a scorching blade, with wisps of dim golden light wrapped around its sharp edge, preemptively pierced out from the front of Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's heavy chest armor, forcefully penetrating his entire towering frame. This was a revenge counterattack successfully executed by the living Saint Celestine, who had just been resurrected from death, in a weakened posture while half kneeling on the ground. But unfortunately, precisely because of the living Saint Celestine's revenge strike, the fatal blow from the wild wolf cub's frost great axe unfortunately missed. You watched with your own eyes as the extremely sharp, terrifying great blade deeply embedded itself inside Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's heavy shoulder armor, merely tearing apart half of his shoulder and chest before temporarily losing its threat. And just as you took the opportunity to re-swing the two melee weapons gripped in your palms, to once again deliver a finishing blow to Chaos Warmaster Abaddon, whose head was ruined and whose expression was growing increasingly ferocious and distorted. Chi. Along with the suddenly chaotic energies all around, several already activated melta-bombs actually appeared out of thin air inside Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's Horus's claw. At this moment, you stared intently at the sinister smile that appeared at the corner of Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's mouth. You also vaguely heard a fleeting, treacherous laugh near your ear. Without a second thought, you drove the vibranium power armor to initiate an astonishingly powerful ramming action, abruptly knocking the severely injured Chaos Warmaster Abaddon askew into the nearby space. Immediately afterwards, without any hesitation, you released the two melee weapons tightly gripped in your palms. You quickly used Shadow Step beneath your feet, forcefully pulling the living Saint Celestine, who was half kneeling in front of you, into your arms. As you knelt on one knee, you also abruptly unfolded the pair of massive vibranium wings behind the vibranium power armor outwards, tightly wrapping them around the metal bodies of you and the living saint. Rumble. Chaos Warmaster Abaddon, still in midair, maintained a sinister smile. Teleportation light constantly bloomed on his severely injured towering frame. And after his entire person completely disappeared, the several melta-bombs that had just been released from inside the Horus's claw also violently detonated. In an instant, extremely terrifying scorching heat and violent shockwaves continuously swept and spread towards everything around. The wild wolf cub, who had originally intended to drive his magnetic boots forward to launch a fatal attack on Chaos Warmaster Abaddon, was sent flying backwards with his entire towering frame. And you and the living Saint Celestine, who had instinctively pressed close together, were also quickly submerged in the depths of the scorching flames that were raging back and forth. Chi. At this moment, the burning Emperor's blood banner, its golden flames gradually extinguished, violently collapsed and dissipated. A portion of the remaining dim flames seemed to swiftly condense into a very weak flame shield around you and the living Saint Celestine. Even the string of rosary beads wrapped around your vibranium arm also abruptly burst forth with a series of extremely dazzling, flickering lights. You vaguely sensed a very powerful conversion energy field repeatedly enveloping you and the living Saint Celestine, constantly resisting the terrifying scorching heat and shockwaves from the melta-bombs. After the intense heat and explosive force surrounding you dissipated completely, you couldn't help but exhale a breath. You slowly released your strong arms from around the lithe form of the living Saint Celestine. Your skull helmet tilted slightly downwards, your gaze meeting that of the living Saint Celestine through the lenses. Her purple eyes seemed to hold extremely complex emotions for a fleeting moment. Primarch, you shouldn't have come to save me. Eliminating Chaos Warmaster Abaddon is paramount. Weakened immensely by the psychic suppression, the living Saint Celestine struggled to rise from your embrace. For the first time, she didn't offer you a kind and gentle smile, but instead spoke quickly and coldly. You paused in silence for a moment, the power armor with its warped adamantium wings rising from the ground. The instant that damned schemer chuckled in my ear, I knew Abaddon could never truly die. This is a calculated plot against me. Even if I disregarded everything and killed Abaddon on the spot, the Black Legion and the Chaos Gods would resurrect him, or choose the next Chaos Warmaster. You looked down at the living Saint Celestine, your voice low and grave. You paid no heed to her face, as cold as frost, or the barely perceptible tremor of the burning blade in her metal gauntlet. You simply turned your adamantium power armor around, turning your back to the living Saint Celestine as you searched for the melee weapons you had just discarded. From this moment forward, the destruction of Cadia is a foregone conclusion, beyond even my power to change. Therefore, in my capacity as Primarch, I am issuing an order for a full retreat. All mortal warriors and Astartes forces still fighting for the Imperium of Man, as well as the Titan legions, are to prepare to withdraw from this battlefield. Absurd. Do you even know what you're doing? Do you realize the chain reaction Cadia's fall will trigger, the magnitude of the disaster it will bring to the entire Imperium of Man? How dare you, as a Primarch, be so negligent? At that moment, the living Saint Celestine suddenly moved forward, her power armor clanking. Her expression growing even colder, she widened her purple eyes slightly, staring intently at your tall back as she said in a deep voice. You bent down in your adamantium power armor and retrieved the blood scythe, embedded deep in the ground, and the Forgebreaker Warhammer, buried in the thick ash. You raised your hand and summoned all the humming metal rings, gathering them above your power pack into a purple halo of swirling light. Finally, without turning back, you said to the living saint in a deep voice, "Celestine, this is my order. And it is precisely because I know all the consequences that I am issuing the order to retreat. My scope of war as a Primarch encompasses the entire timeline, not simply facing an apocalyptic battlefield we are destined to lose, completely exhausting the last drop of blood of all the loyal." Dong, dong, dong. Just then, accompanied by a series of heavy footsteps approaching from afar. A tall figure cloaked in white, gripping two guns, nimbly leapt over from the Imperial lines where fierce fighting was taking place. The figure, carrying a mysterious greatsword on their back, quickly passed the Fenrisian wolves being dug out from the depths of the earth by Lord Castellan Creed, the Imperial High Commander, and many Cadian guardsmen. Watched silently by many Black Templars Astartes and Space Wolves Astartes, they quickly arrived beside you. What? Your attempt to assassinate Abaddon failed. Then prepare to evacuate everyone. Cadia's fall is now inevitable. There is no point in trying to save it. I have already met with Eldred Ulthrin, the Farseer of Craftworld Ulthway. The Ynnari, led by Evrain, emissary of Inid, are already poised to provide support from within the webway. Furthermore, Archmagos Belisarius Khal and Trazyn the Infinite have emerged from the underground tunnels. They are currently linking up with the Eldar. Did you reach some kind of agreement with Trazyn? He hasn't chosen to flee immediately, but is instead controlling chaos tanks and demon engines, intending to buy our forces more time. At that moment, before Cypher's words could finish, his gaze, flitting back and forth, inadvertently landed on the living Saint Celestine, her white face holding an indifferent expression. However, before he could ask you anything with a puzzled expression, you immediately ordered Cypher to relay the retreat order to the entire battlefield. Cypher, twitching the corner of his mouth, narrowed his eyes slightly. He took a deep look at the living Saint Celestine's indifferent white face, then turned and sped away towards the chaotic battlefield. Rumble. Just then, the terrifying roar from the sky caused you and everyone present to instinctively raise your heads. Looking up, within the atmosphere, already increasingly blood-red due to the rampant chaos energy and pervasive smoke, a large amount of wreckage from the Blackstone Fortress, Will of Eternity, began to appear, along with more large metal fragments raining down across the battlefield like meteorites. At the same time, the terrifying energy cannons rapidly brewing on the Black Legion flagship, Planet Killer, poured down upon the shattered continent of Cadia like a torrential rain, unleashing Abaddon's terrifying fury. At this moment, even the living Saint Celestine had to believe your final judgment about the impending destruction of Cadia. She quickly deployed the pure white wings on her back, enduring the psychic suppression from the invisible oppressive force field, and quickly relayed the retreat order you issued in your capacity as Primarch to all parts of the chaotic battlefield. At the same time, you casually handed a vial of Panacea capsules to Lord Castellan Creed, the Imperial High Commander, who had suffered grievous injuries and lost an arm, so that he could share it with the many wounded around him. You quickly activated your adamantium power armor and, after throwing a Forgebreaker Warhammer to the snarling Fenrisian wolf, the two of you jointly shouldered the important task of covering the retreat for everyone on the battlefield. Soon after, as large and small ships and Blackstone wreckage continued to fall from the blood-red sky, the Blackstone obelisks scattered across the entire Cadian continent began to shatter and crumble. Buzz, buzz, buzz. After the invisible oppressive force field that suppressed psychic powers rapidly weakened and dissipated, several massive webway portals suddenly appeared at the edges of the chaotic battlefield. Many mortal warriors and sisters of battle units who had received the retreat order from the living saint, under the desperate cover of the Astartes chapters, quickly began sprinting towards the webway portals. Even the dozen or so remaining god machines and knight households on the chaotic battlefield unleashed their final terrifying firepower upon the reactivated chaos forces, while moving their massive, broken metal bodies towards the webway portals. For Enid, the next second, a group of slender, Lythionari warriors of the Death Guard, wielding sharp melee weapons and heavy-ranged firepower, surged out from within a webway portal. Swiftly moving, led personally by Evrain, the Visarch of Enid, they fought alongside many retreating Astartes and mortal warriors around the webway portals. Under Cypher's continuous and loud shouts, the Imperial forces, barely managing to restrain themselves from turning their guns, fought alongside the Eldar warriors of the Death Guard against the ubiquitous Chaos forces. At this moment, you, who were constantly scanning the battlefield situation in order to maximize the number and safety of those retreating, and in a final attempt to avert the tragic end of Cadia. Having temporarily arrived near the webway portals, you abruptly extended an adamantium hand towards the blood-red sky. In an instant, a massive beam of divine power, interwoven with iridescent colors, erupted from the surface of Cadia. Awaken, celestial Kirin, roar. As the illusory and gigantic head of the celestial Kirin beast slowly extended from the colorful pillar of light that rose from the ground. A roar that almost echoed throughout the entire world of Cadia reverberated across the chaotic, smoke-filled battlefield. You have successfully summoned the celestial Kirin beast, its limbs standing firmly on the earth. At this moment, countless Chaos demons and cultists, as well as Chaos Astartes who were besieging the Imperial evacuation forces, looked up. They even temporarily ceased all offensive actions at hand. Because the Chaos forces mistakenly believed that the celestial Kirin beast was a terrifying evil creature summoned out of thin air from the warp by some great power of destruction. Some Chaos cultists with muddled minds even subconsciously cheered. Rumble. Until the celestial Kirin beast, controlled by your consciousness, slowly raised a illusory and gigantic foot, brutally crushing hundreds of Chaos Astartes from the Black Legion, and with a swing of its tail, obliterating thousands of Chaos demons and cultists on the spot. The cheers of the Chaos forces came to an abrupt halt, and they suddenly realized what was happening and launched an even more intense siege. At this moment, cheers and roars from the Imperial side echoed across the chaotic battlefield. A large number of aerial vehicles descending from the Protectorate Guard fleet and the Mountain Array, under the protection of the celestial Kirin beast, braved the terrifying firepower of chaos and began evacuating countless Imperial troops. While controlling the massive celestial Kirin beast to rampage and slaughter across the chaotic battlefield, you condensed strands of iridescent energy torrents in its illusory maw. Chi. You suddenly raised that gigantic illusory dragon head and unleashed a terrifying energy bombardment against a fragment of the Black Fortress about to fall. In an instant, this fragment of the Black Fortress exploded into even more fine fragments, which were completely submerged in the continuous energy torrent. However, at this moment, when you focused your attention completely on the blood-red sky above, one fragment after another of the Black Fortress appearing in your field of vision also overwhelmed you. Rumble. As an even greater number of Black Fortress fragments, wrapped in wisps of frictional fire, crashed heavily onto the surface of Cadia. The extremely terrifying impact instantly tore apart the surrounding earth, and also heralded the collapse and destruction of many mountains and hills. Even as you constantly controlled the celestial Kirin beast to spew energy torrents, shattering a large number of Black Fortress fragments, you also allowed more Imperial troops to either retreat into the depths of the webway portal, or leave aboard aerial vehicles. But regardless, the world of Cadia itself could not be saved. You clearly saw countless streams of scorching magma gushing out rapidly from the depths of the cracks in the surface of the earth, and huge pieces of crustal plates seemed to be breaking apart as if they had escaped from the earth's gravity. You seemed to hear with your own ears the low wail and final elegy of the ignorant world soul from within Cadia. A faint sorrow vaguely emerged from the bottom of your heart. You slowly controlled the celestial Kirin beast, whose divine power was rapidly dissipating, and unleashed a final energy torrent towards the largest fragment of the Black Fortress in the blood-red sky. Rumble. Before long, with the divine power reserves in your body almost completely exhausted, you couldn't help but kneel on one knee on the ground, and could only allow more Black Fortress fragments to fall like meteor showers on the constantly collapsing earth. Just then, the wild wolf cub, carrying a breaker maul on his thick shoulder armor, and the Cypher Lord, clutching twin pistols in his palm, came to your side. With solemn expressions, they both glanced around at the surrounding doomsday scene and the chaos enemies who were still trying to attack. The two of them reached out and propped up your tall body, which was temporarily unable to move, and quickly ran towards the webway portal not far away. You successfully entered the interior of the webway portal, leaving the doomed world of Cadia. The medical life support system inside the adamantium power armor began injecting liquefied panacea into your body. Your entire exhausted body gradually recovered, and you were freed from the support of others. You looked around and saw Marshal Emeric standing nearby, as well as many Black Templar Astartes, the living Saint Celestine occasionally watching you with purple eyes, and Inquisitor Grifax, who was in a low voice talking with Archmagos Call, who was carrying a large floating cargo container. At the same time, you also noticed the Eldar around, especially the Death Jester's emissary of Rain and the Shifting Vector, who were silently sizing you up with a scrutinizing gaze. You slowly activated the adamantium power armor and stepped forward, with the wild wolf cub and the Cypher Lord following behind you. The surrounding people made way for the three of you, allowing you to stand side by side with the living Saint Celestine. When more of the Imperial remnant stood closely behind you, as if they had found their backbone. You first expressed your gratitude to the Eldar side for providing the rescue operation in your capacity as a Primarch. Afterwards, you exchanged glances with the wild wolf cub and the Cypher Lord, and then asked the living Saint Celestine next to you about the next step of the plan. And the living saint, blinking her purple eyes, conveyed the vague will of the Emperor to you without any hesitation. All of you must go to the 500 worlds of Ultramar, to find the Lord of Macragge. You slightly tilted your skull helmet towards the living saint. Your gaze inadvertently met the Archmagos Call, whose countless mechanical eyes were retracting and swiveling. After the other party casually performed a cogwheel salute and a very discreet familiar gesture towards you. You instantly understood that you might have already met Archmagos Call. In other words, among the people present, except for those ordinary Astartes and mortal warriors who were completely unaware of the next course of action. Whether it was the leader of the Eldar side or the leader of the Imperial side, they all knew what you were going to do in Macragge. After all, another Gene Sire, who had been asleep for 10,000 years, should also get up and stretch his legs under the Emperor's vigorous encouragement. It's time to get up, Guilliman, you mused silently. You immediately began to move rapidly within the spacious and interconnected webway. After what felt like an endless forced march, where you completely lost track of time, The Eldar reinforcements guiding you used spirit bones to reopen a sizable portal on one side of the webway. Before the Imperium forces chose to step out of the portal, you conveniently shared all the heavy firepower and ammunition stored in your inventory. Thump, thump, thump. Soon after, the young wolf, carrying the furnace breaker warhammer on his thick shoulder armor, and Lord Sepher, wielding the white tiger blade, led the tireless Black Templars out of the portal under the full coordination of Marshal Emmerich. Once you, too, gripped the blood scythe and successfully exited the webway, the first thing you saw was the fortress monastery ahead, where the Ultramarines were bravely fighting against the Chaos Astartes from the Plague Company. And the Black Templars were engaged in fierce combat with the Iron Warriors and Night Lords traitors. At the same time, living Saint Celestine, carefully maintaining the large suspended cargo container with Archmago's call, and escorted by Evrain and others, led a larger number of Imperial troops quickly out of the webway portal. You quickly led the Imperial forces gathered behind you in a near-annihilating encirclement against the approaching Chaos Astartes. Metal 10 rings shimmering with purple light streaked through the air amidst the launch fire of countless bolters and cyclone missile launchers, sweeping towards all enemies in front. At this moment, the arrival of you unexpected reinforcements undoubtedly greatly relieved the combat pressure on the Ultramarines. After you established brief communication with some of the Ultramarines, command personnel, the gradually converging troops cooperated with your encirclement operation. Boom, boom, boom. On the battlefield filled with fire, the young wolf, wielding the furnace breaker warhammer in his hands, sped back and forth like a humanoid bulldozer. Few Chaos Astartes could fully withstand his terrifying hammer blows, only some Night Lords, sergeants could temporarily engage him through stealth tactics, but they would only last a few rounds before the young wolf smashed their heads. Lord Sepher, wielding the white tiger blade in his hands, fought against the death guard of the Plague Company. Countless rapidly growing severed limbs flew everywhere, while terrifying plasma spheres bloomed on the helmet faces of these Chaos Astartes. As time went on, the number of Chaos Astartes on the battlefield rapidly decreased. When the last Chaos Astartes was bisected by the blood scythe in your hand, you successfully helped the Ultramarines defend the fortress. In the next moment, many Astartes from the Ultramarines quickly came before you, kneeling on one knee in your direction. You also learned from them that the Lord of Macragge, Ultramarines Chapter Master Calgar, had secretly revealed your existence as a lost Primarch to the entire chapter. You immediately issued orders to the Ultramarines in front of you. You will lead a portion of the Imperial forces to meet with Ultramarines Chapter Master Calgar to support Macragge, the capital of Ultramar, which is under attack by a combined fleet of the Black Legion, Night Lords, and Iron Warriors. Thus, the Ultramarines, who had just defended the local fortress, began to tirelessly contact the strike cruisers in near orbit for you. Soon after, dozens of Thunderhawk transports transported all of you into the interior of the strike cruiser. As the Geller field was activated, the entire metal ship immediately began warp travel towards Macragge. During this time, while everyone temporarily entered a state of rest, you and Archmago's call formally began a face-to-face conversation. The massive Archmagos, while using servitor arms to adjust and repair the vibranium power armor on your towering frame, slowly began to introduce you to the armor of destiny that was about to be gifted to Lord Guilliman. You silently listened to the Archmagus's mechanical voice and complained to Archmago's call. He should get along better with your Mechanicus Adept, because he also often tries to sell you things while repairing them. At this moment, Archmago's call suddenly deployed an invisible shielding field around him. He continuously rotated the hundreds of small mechanical eyeballs located beneath his red robes and whispered into your ear. Venerable Primarch, I need to request a portion of your precious blood containing the Primarch gene structure. I wonder what your thoughts are. A mere portion of the Primarch's blood is naturally fine, but can you tell me what you actually want to do? If I calculate the time correctly, your Primaris Astartes should have already been completed, right? You slightly turned your bronze face, your gaze fixed on his massive frame, and said calmly. However, Archmago's call did not speak to you at this time. He slowly extended a mechanical arm towards you, carefully writing 2 numbers in the vibranium palm you raised upwards, 2 and 11. Then, he gestured the name of each traitor legion to you. At this moment, you subconsciously widened your eyes, and couldn't help but gasp. Archmagos Belisarius call, should I say you are audacious, or should I get up and shoot you, do you know what you are doing? However, my thinking is different from Gilliman who will soon awaken. He needs to consider the current state of the Imperium, and I need to consider the future battlefield. More importantly, I never care about the faces of the High Lords of Terra. Well, you will understand what I am talking about later. 2nd, 11th, and those traitor legions that no longer have demon primarchs can be allowed to create a batch of Primaris Astartes, and the remaining legions are prohibited from any research. Because you simply don't understand how terrifying the entanglement between the gene seed and bloodline descendants is. Therefore, the Emperor's blood in my body can be given to you. If you can make this batch of Primaris Astartes somewhat possess the chaos resistance ability of the Grey Knights, then I will allow you to freely delve into even more forbidden technologies. Even if you tell me that you want to be the Fabricator General of Mars, I will find a way to achieve your goal as a Primarch. I tell you plainly, Belisarius call. I possess a new galaxy different from the Imperium of Man, a pure universe that has not been reclaimed by the Adeptus Mechanicus or any other force. If you want more technological knowledge or even conduct unrestricted research, then stand on my side in the future. Around the ultramar world of Macragge, the capital planet, a combined chaos fleet had already formed a tight encirclement. Countless scorching laser beams and terrifying light lances continuously fired outwards from the weapon arrays of the Macragge defense fleet, while numerous void shields flickering back and forth on near-orbital defense platforms repeatedly resisted the terrifying torpedoes and dazzling light lances from the Chaos Fleet. At this moment, the strike cruiser and several escort frigates carrying all of you had just emerged from a warp jump within the Imaterium. Before the multicolored Geller field could be deactivated, your presence was swiftly detected by the Chaos Fleet's weapon arrays. Simultaneously, clad in a brand new vibranium-powered armor, you stood inside the bridge, clearly hearing the strike cruiser's naval captain unhesitatingly issue the order to activate the void shields and forcibly break through the Chaos Fleet's blockade. You turned and nodded slightly to everyone around you. All of you began hurrying towards the large number of flight vehicles inside the mid-level deck of the ship. Once the strike cruiser's massive metal hull began to hum and vibrate continuously, and the void shields began to withstand the brunt of the terrifying incoming fire. The strike cruiser, having chosen to accelerate to its maximum speed, began a frantic dash towards Macragge, desperately shielded by one escort frigate after another. Perhaps the Macragge defense fleet received information about your presence as a lost Primarch from the strike cruiser, as they began to launch an incredibly fierce counterattack against the ubiquitous Chaos Fleet with far greater intensity than before. Before long, having lost several escort frigates, the strike cruiser successfully reached Macragge's near orbit under the escort of the defense fleet. You, who had been waiting inside the flight vehicles for a long time, quickly began a rapid transfer towards the planet's surface. However, as the Thunderhawk transports roared through the skies above Macragge's once incomparably glorious ancient city, what you could see from the portholes were terrifying fires and thick smoke in every direction, as well as numerous ultramarines and Chaos Astartes engaged in fierce combat between ancient buildings, vying for fortified strongholds. On the wide streets, many heavy vehicles belonging to the Ultramar Auxilia were frantically resisting the onslaught and ambushes of numerous demon engines. Clearly, for Macragge and the Ultramarines chapter, the joint reinforcements of you humans and Eldar had arrived just in time. You gripped the blood scythe tightly in your palm, activating the vibranium-powered armor and standing in front of the slowly opening heavy hatch. Gusts of fierce wind heavily swept across your vibranium armor's outer shell and skull helmet. You could already see a Thunderhawk transport not far away, where a space wolf whelp wielding a frost axe was slamming down onto the battlefield like a human meteorite. You deliberately contacted Lord Cypher through the team's internal communication channel, instructing him not to stray far from Archmagos' call, and to protect the precious cargo called the Armor of Fate together with the Emissary of Rain and others. You quickly took a step forward, your entire towering body plummeting heavily towards the battlefield below. Just as you were about to land, the propulsion device behind the power armor suddenly erupted with bursts of dazzling energy, causing your entire body to come to a sudden halt in midair. At the same time, Saint Celestine, the living saint, who had already spread a pair of pure white wings and soared in the sky above, revealed her extremely lithe and conspicuous golden figure. If your arrival as a Primarch inadvertently increased the fighting will and morale of the Ultramarines present, making their attacks on the Chaos Astartes more intense and swift. Then the arrival of Saint Celestine, the living saint, also used the golden light from the Emperor to temporarily soothe the slightest pain in the hearts of countless Ultramar auxilia and sheltered civilians. Approximately several hours later, the situation on this nearby battlefield was entirely under your control. Large numbers of Chaos Astartes from the Alpha Legion and Iron Warriors were all slaughtered by you, the Space Wolf Whelp, and the Astartes of the Ultramarines and Black Templars. Having once again gathered the entire rescue team, you successfully obtained directional guidance from the Ultramarines command echelon. You quickly traversed between ancient and exquisite buildings, rushing towards an important stronghold called the Fortress of Hera. And now, Marius Calgar, Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, Lord of Macragge, was coordinating and commanding the many forces on the battlefield there. You, the Space Wolf Whelp, and the Astartes of the Black Templars quickly formed an assault team maintaining a strike formation. You successfully broke through the Fortress of Hera, which was constantly besieged by the Chaos Astartes of the Black Legion and Night Lords, and escorted the massive Archmago's Call, along with his precious cargo, as well as the even more important Eldar Death Guard and Emissary of Rain, into the interior of the fortress. At this moment, you slowly removed the skull helmet covering your entire head, revealing that bronze-colored, resolute face. Large numbers of Ultramarines and Chapter High Command preparing for battle in the fortress quickly rushed towards your location. However, before their excited expressions could lead them to kneel before you on one knee, a series of low humming sounds suddenly passed in front of everyone, and several metal purity seals abruptly stopped the kneeling behavior that was about to occur. Calgar, now that you've revealed my existence to all the Ultramarines brothers, why didn't you tell them that I, this Primarch, don't like being knelt to in person? You slightly shifted your gaze. You stared at a tall figure striding forward, driving a blue Terminator power armor, and at the pair of massive power fists that seemed to have never been removed, and said in a calm tone, "Honorable Primarch, long time no see, you have become even more majestic and valiant. As for your request, can I say that I accidentally forgot it before?" The Lord of Macragge, whose size seemed to be significantly larger than the surrounding Ultramarines, slowly stopped in front of you. He first indifferently shifted his cold face, which seemed to have never revealed any emotion, especially using his mechanical left eye to focus on scrutinizing the direction where Emissary of Rain and others were located. The other party suddenly stepped closer to your side and deliberately lowered his voice to say, "Honorable Primarch, even if you lead the team to come and support us Macragge and the Ultramarines, bringing these pointy-eared aliens along as well is a bit too much, isn't it?" You raised an eyebrow slightly. You propelled the vibranium-powered armor, moving your magnetic boots, and turned to gaze at the Emissary of Rain, who had already overheard Cargos's racist remarks. At this moment, her delicate and exquisite fair face did not reveal any emotional changes, only her Death Guard adjutant, the chosen of 1,000 faces, stared intently at Cargos's towering figure. Of Rain merely shook the emerald feather ornaments resembling a peacock's tail behind her white, skyward-bound hair under your gaze, while also slowly raising the crone sword in her slender hand, scrutinizing the sharp blade that gleamed with an icy light. "They are important allies to us now, especially for that matter." You quickly withdrew your gaze. You stared at Cargos, who was close at hand, and said to him with a solemn expression, "Cargos, the time has come. Function changes, parity remains." At that moment, you heard the agreed-upon code phrase that you blurted out. The fine wrinkles on Cargos's indifferent and stern face instantly relaxed and trembled. He took a deep breath, and then, with a slight twitch of his lips, replied to you with the second half of the complete code phrase in a reluctant and low voice. Chaos is shit. PFF'd. Ha ha ha. Instantly, the uncontainable laughter of the wolf cub echoed throughout the Hela fortress, which was occasionally punctuated by the rumble of artillery fire. The next second, Lord Cypher, his face also flushed slightly, punched a wolf cub next to him, stopping the overly unrestrained laughter. At present, whether it was the Ultramarines standing around, or the Black Templars who had come with you, they all subconsciously focused their attention on Cargos's towering body. The corner of your mouth twitched slightly. You slowly raised a vibranium hand and heavily patted Cargos's thick shoulder armor a few times. Perhaps to avoid the rising embarrassment in his heart and to escape the scrutiny of the crowd. Cargos, having reactivated his Terminator armor and quickly turned around, began to tell the surrounding Ultramarines and Chapter Command about the secret agreement between him and you. When the Ultramarines heard that you were doing this to resurrect their Gene Father, Primarch Rebute Guilliman, a considerable number of Ultramarines immediately knelt on one knee in your direction, some even lowering their tear-streaked faces with incomparable excitement. However, there were still many Ultramarines whose thoughts and emotions were clearly more rational and calm, who patiently advised Cargos in front of them, suppressing the anger in their hearts. You noticed that among them were Captain Cato Sicarius of the 2nd Company of the Ultramarines chapter, and Captain Agemon of the 1st Company. You fully understood their series of actions and cautious thoughts. After all, even you now cannot guarantee 100% that Guilliman will wake up unscathed from the stasis field after sleeping for tens of thousands of years. Not to mention these Ultramarines who have long believed in their hearts that their Gene Father has been killed for countless years. However, after Cargos, with a solemn expression, made a guarantee to all the Ultramarines present in the name of the Chapter Master's combat honor and the noble status of Lord of Macragge. You, slightly shaking your head, also activated your vibranium-powered armor and stepped forward, standing directly beside Cargos. You and the living Saint Celestine, who quickly followed, made a final promise to everyone present in the name of you, the Primarch, and the guidance of the Emperor. No matter what changes may occur next, all of you will do your best to ensure that Primarch Guilliman successfully awakens from his slumber and returns to the Imperium of Man and the 500 worlds once again. At the same time, in order to maximize the trust and support from the Ultramarines, the massive Adeptus Mechanicus Belisarius call also unfolded the suspended cargo container for the first time in front of you. It slightly showed the armor of fate hidden inside and several powerful weapons, and also completely revealed the orders and agreements it made with Primarch Guilliman 10,000 years ago to you. Only then did the opposition faction within the Ultramarines truly believe that your rescue plan had a very high chance of success. Thus, the Ultramarines, who were already fully armed, put aside their prejudices and contradictions and quickly took action as a whole. At this moment, more Ultramar auxilia and armored units were being rapidly mobilized from all over Macragge towards the location of the sanctuary where Primarch Guilliman was sleeping under Cargos's remote command. 1st Company Captain Agemon led many 1st Company Terminator veterans of the Ultramarines chapter and surrounded Adeptus Mechanicus Belisarius Call in the armor of fate, quickly forming an airtight defensive formation. Because in their opinion, Adeptus Mechanicus Belisarius Call and the armor of fate were the important items that gave hope for the resurrection of their Gene Father, and they must arrive at Primarch Guilliman's figure intact. You gripped the blood scythe tightly, and together with the wolf cub carrying the Forgebreaker Warhammer, and Lord Cypher drawing the Tiger Claw Greatsword, led Marshal Amalrich's Black Templars, surrounding Emissary of Rain of the Death Guard, and living Saint Celestine, among others, inside the formation. Soon after, Cargos, who had raised his massive power fists, and 2nd Company Captain Sicarius of the Ultramarines led the Ultramarines in the Hela Fortress to form the spearhead of the massive team. Courage and glory, for Rebute Guilliman. The next second, accompanied by Cargos's deep roar that resounded around. All of you, without prior agreement, launched a frenzied sprint towards the external space that had just opened the fortress gate. You continuously brandished the weapons in your palms, braving the terrifying firepower from a large number of Chaos Astartes, and worked together like a sharp arrow shot out, piercing through the Black Legion battle line that was besieging Hela Fortress, and continuously moved at high speed towards the sanctuary where Primarch Guilliman was sleeping. At the same time, the Chaos Combined Fleet of the Black Legion also seemed to foresee some major change, and a large number of Dreadclaw drop pods carrying veteran Chaos Space Marines of the Long War began to prepare for an even more terrifying descent towards the planet's surface. As time passed, after all of you, under the sacrifice and cover of many Ultramarines, successfully entered this magnificent sanctuary with a large architectural scale and extremely exquisite decoration. Screech. You, who suddenly stopped your magnetic boots, slowly removed the skull helmet that covered your head. You saw at a glance the golden-haired giant with a resolute and solemn expression on his bronze face, but whose eyes were always tightly closed, and his burly body, which was even taller and stronger than you, but sat motionless deep within the stasis field. This is the true master of Ultramar of the 500 worlds, the Lord of Macragge, the Gene Primarch of the Ultramarines, the 13th son of the Emperor, one of the saviors of the Imperium of Man. Rebute Guilliman. Rumble. At this moment, a series of terrifying rumbling sounds coming from outside the shrine, growing closer, temporarily interrupted your and others' admiration of Primarch Guilliman. Your keen beast senses also made you slightly raise your head, gazing at the shrine's thick dome and the shrine's gate, which was under repeated assault by a large number of Chaos Astartes. Without any hesitation, you waved your vibranium hand forward. Captain Ageman of the Ultramarines quickly led a group of Terminator veterans, delivering the armor of fate and Archmago's call to the vicinity of the stasis field. Even Envoy Ivrain and the others, at your signal, were brought near Primarch Guilliman by Saint Celestine, the living saint. As Archmago's call began manipulating the enormous hovering container with several mechanical arms, the ceremony to save Primarch Guilliman rapidly commenced. Rumble. Just then, the entire shrine's thick dome suddenly caved inward, and a series of heavily armored Dreadclaws, along with a large amount of debris from the building, crashed into your field of vision. The next second, after the landing pod's doors exploded open, Chaos Space Marine veterans in black Terminator armor charged out, wielding demon weapons and roaring furiously as they launched an extremely savage and terrifying assault on everyone around. At the same time, the shrine's gate, desperately defended by 2nd Company Captain Sicarius and the Black Templars, was temporarily breached by a large number of Chaos Astartes. Almost in the blink of an eye, the entire massive shrine was plunged into a state of unparalleled chaotic slaughter. In a flash of lightning, you firmly grasped the blood scythe in your palm. You quickly activated your vibranium power armor, forming a triangular formation with the young wolf and Cypher Lord not far from Primarch Guilliman's stasis field. You continuously swung your melee weapons forward, engaging in an even more intense and merciless slaughter with the Chaos Space Marine veterans who sought to break through the defense line amidst the chaos. You swiftly used the indestructible physical properties of your vibranium power armor, enduring the heavy blows of several demon weapons around you, and rammed your entire body fiercely into the Terminator armor of a Chaos Space Marine veteran. The next second, before you could retract the outward swinging blood scythe to severely injure the opponent. The Breaker battle hammer from the young wolf's palm and the White Tiger greatsword wielded by Cypher Lord struck and cleaved heavily onto the staggering Chaos Space Marine veteran from different directions, completely killing him before you. You also took the opportunity to suddenly sweep the blood scythe, with its green light swirling around the sharp blade, horizontally forward, successfully cutting down several other Chaos Space Marine veterans on the spot who prioritized their desire to attack over their own safety. However, even if the three of you could use perfectly coordinated teamwork to continuously kill the surging Chaos Space Marine veterans. These Chaos Space Marine veterans, who had honed their killing skills through countless years of experience, were not so easy for others to deal with. A single ordinary Astartes could not withstand the Chaos Space Marine veterans for more than a few rounds before tragically becoming a broken corpse on the ground. You noticed that only a defensive formation of several people could barely engage the Chaos Space Marine veterans in close combat. You immediately strained your voice, issuing warnings and reminders to the friendly forces around you. You also saw on the more distant battlefield that Calgar, like an incredibly angry blue giant, was swinging his massive power fists back and forth, enduring the continuous siege of more than a dozen Chaos Space Marine veterans. The plasteel fragments of his Terminator armor were constantly breaking off, but his battered and scarred towering body showed no signs of falling, still stubbornly persevering in the fight. You immediately shook your vibranium hand at the young wolf and Cypher Lord, who were fighting nearby. The two of them quickly killed the Chaos Space Marine veterans in front of them and then leapt towards the surrounding Chaos Astartes and veterans, engaging in fierce combat while also temporarily buying more chances of survival for others on the battlefield. Saint Celestine, the living saint, wielding her blazing blade, also flapped her massive pure white wings and joined the chaotic battlefield inside the shrine. She even unintentionally saved Inquisitor Griefax, who had exhausted his ammunition, from the hands of several Chaos Space Marine veterans. At the same time, the enormous hovering container, personally controlled by Archmago's Call, had completely enveloped Primarch Guilliman within it. Envoy of Rain, with a slightly solemn expression, also held the Crone sword, gleaming with cold light, ready to sever the energy cables maintaining the stasis field, temporarily ending Primarch Guilliman's remaining life. At this moment, 1st Company Captain Ageman, leading a portion of the Terminator veterans standing nearby, seemed to have noticed something unusual. However, before he could voice his doubts and stop Envoy of Rain's actions, Envoy of Rain, who had just received countless approving glances from Archmago's Call, instantly raised the Crone sword and forcefully severed the energy cables maintaining the stasis field. Hiss. At that moment, as you swung the blood scythe back and forth, you seemed to hear Primarch Guilliman exhale his last breath from his robust body, and he completely lost any detectable signs of life. But the next second, the armor of fate, which suddenly emitted waves of deep humming, constantly exerted the healing abilities of a powerful creation and a small amount of assistance from the Emperor, allowing the temporarily deceased Primarch Guilliman to regain the first trace of a rough, new breath. Rumble. Accompanied by the mechanical rumbling sounds of the enormous hovering container continuously unfolding outward and the indicator lights turning from red to green. Everyone present, whether the crazed Chaos Space Marine veterans or the battered friendly forces, stopped their attacks in unison. Almost everyone turned their heads with blank expressions, looking towards Primarch Guilliman's location. Even you subconsciously stopped swinging the blood scythe in your palm, standing in place with a solemn expression, looking towards the rear. At this moment, Primarch Guilliman, whose tall and robust body was completely covered in the armor of fate, suddenly opened his eyes, which had been tightly closed, as his breathing gradually returned to normal. You seemed to clearly see a golden light flash and disappear from the depths of his eyes. At this moment, Primarch Guilliman, who was scanning the unfamiliar scene and the people before him, focused his sharp gaze on you. And as his brows couldn't help but furrow slightly, a trace of doubt seemed to appear on his bronze, resolute face. Roar. Right there on the battlefield inside the shrine, a Chaos Space Marine veteran in Terminator armor suddenly raised his head and let out a roar that echoed all around. Then, the opponent quickly activated his Terminator armor, charging fearlessly towards Primarch Guilliman with a terrifying and awe-inspiring momentum. However, at this moment, you personally witnessed the look of doubt on Guilliman's bronze, resolute face vanish instantly. Instead, a complex emotion of anger and indifference intertwined continuously emerged. Rumble. In the next second, Guilliman, his expression incomparably cold, abruptly activated his massive body clad in the armor of fate, rising from his stasis field. Then, with a terrifying speed that even your bestial senses could barely capture a blurred image of, he crashed into the chaotic battlefield below like a huge blue meteor. Bang! Immediately following, the Chaos Space Marine who was desperately charging forward was sent flying backward into the air at an even faster speed. Judging from the traitor's metal helmet, which was already completely shattered, he had unfortunately become the first unlucky victim after Primarch Guilliman's awakening and return. At this moment, you stared at the tall and sturdy figure firmly standing on the broken ground, constantly moving his thick arms, quickly adapting to the armor of fate, and slowly exhaled a breath. You subconsciously raised the blood scythe in your palm towards the sky, and without any hesitation, you let out a furious roar that echoed throughout the sanctuary to everyone around. Brothers and sisters, to celebrate Guilliman's successful return, let us kill all these traitors. Instantly, one excited roar after another, like a tsunami, rose and fell in succession, echoing in the sanctuary's sky and even drifting to farther places. The Chaos Astartes who had just stopped their attack also suddenly realized something and quickly waved their demon weapons at everyone around them again. However, at this moment, whether it was the heavily casualties Ultramarines or the Cadian survivors who had been following you, having personally witnessed the return of a Primarch, they all erupted with a fighting will and terrifying morale that even the surrounding Chaos Space Marines could not surpass or resist. As Primarch Guilliman, wanting to vent the anger in his heart, continuously drove the armor of fate, rampaging inside the entire sanctuary, he relentlessly slaughtered the Chaos Space Marines with a suppressive ability far beyond conventional combat. The intense battle inside the entire sanctuary quickly entered its final stages. Poochie. When the last Chaos Space Marine had his entire skull crushed by the indifferent Primarch Guilliman, and most of his body was blasted into pieces by the bolter fire from the gauntlets of Dominion, accompanied by a series of heavy footsteps, Captain Calgar, whose blue Terminator armor was covered in scars, along with 1st Company Captain Ageman and 2nd Company Captain Sicarius, quickly led the surviving Ultramarines forward, kneeling on one knee towards Primarch Guilliman without hesitation. Primarch Guilliman, with a slightly dazed look, scanned the crowd around him, then solemnly asked these unfamiliar sons to rise from the ground. You casually carried the green glowing blood scythe, slowly activating the golden power armor that was retracting its auramite wings, and came to Primarch Guilliman's side. At this moment, Guilliman, whose bronze, resolute face had not shown the slightest positive emotion since his awakening, finally revealed a fleeting, faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Young brother, I unexpectedly sensed the aura of many brothers on you. Apart from those damned traitors, how is everyone else? You heard the inquiry from Primarch Guilliman in your ear. You slightly raised your neck. Your gaze fixed on the other party, who was obviously much taller than you, and said in a low voice, "Old brother, I don't think now is the time to talk about these things. The Chaos Fleet from the Black Legion is besieging Macragge in the Void, and the battle outside the Sanctuary is still ongoing. Right now, your Ultramar citizens are suffering an unprovoked disaster. Why don't we take care of these traitors first?" You speak correctly. Black Legion, an unfamiliar name. Who is their warmaster? Is it one of our traitorous brothers? Primarch Guilliman, taking a deep breath, slowly tilted his chiseled chin towards you while asking. This is a Chaos Legion formed by Horus's son, Abaddon the Despoiler. I don't know if you still remember, he's the guy who always kept a topknot on his head. Ah, not long ago, his topknot was cut off by me, I don't know if it can grow back. You briefly explained the origin of the Black Legion to the other party. In the next moment, Primarch Guilliman, without continuing to question you, quickly took over the command authority of the entire Ultramarines chapter. After learning about the overall battlefield situation on Macragge through every communication channel, he also successfully took over the command authority of all ground combat forces. Next, you, the Wolf Cub, and Lord Cypher temporarily acted as the sharp spearheads in Primarch Guilliman's hands, used to breach the Chaos Astartes lines. You respectively led the remaining small number of Black Templars and the reorganized Ultramarines. Continuously following the orders issued by Primarch Guilliman, you repeatedly interspersed through the weak points of the Chaos Astartes defenses, constantly breaking up and dividing their originally extremely solid defensive positions. As time passed and the situation developed, after Primarch Guilliman personally revealed his tall and sturdy striking figure on the battlefield, the Ultramar Auxilia, who were quickly inspired by the Primarch's return, also firmly surrounded the retreating Chaos Astartes from the outer perimeter. Now, the major news of Primarch Guilliman's successful resurrection and return has quickly spread throughout Macragge, and even every world in the 500 worlds of Ultramar is receiving the important communication of the Primarch's return. As the defending fleet, constantly facing the Black Legion fleet in the Cold Void, launched one difficult and sacrificial attack after another. The Black Legion fleet, suffering heavy casualties in ship numbers, seemed to think that after the Primarch's awakening, it was no longer possible to achieve the necessary results, and could only drop a large amount of ship wreckage on the orbit before starting a hasty retreat. Thus, when the battle on the ground of Macragge gradually came to an end, and the last Chaos Astartes was cleaned up by you, the tall and sturdy Primarch Guilliman stood upright among the war-torn surface, formally announcing the Primarch's return and the victory of the war to everyone in front of him. Not long after, Primarch Guilliman, under the gaze of you all, temporarily held a brief ceremony of return. He slowly activated the armor of fate, and wielding the Emperor's sword burning with psychic flames, he stepped onto the command throne within Macragge that had been vacant for 10,000 years, accepting the adoration of all the Ultramarines and the Ultramar Auxiliary Army. After this symbolic ceremony concluded, Primarch Guilliman, eager to learn more information and the truth, began to receive all those who had come to awaken him and support Macragge. He first summoned the current chapter master of the Ultramarines, Calgar, and others, and then separately received the living Saint Celestine, Inquisitor Grifax, Marshal Amalrich of the Black Templars, and the Grand Master of the Grey Knights who had come to support the Ultramarines. Even Evrain, emissary of the Aeldari Death God, and the Visarch received a secret audience with Primarch Guilliman. During this period, Primarch Guilliman, who had almost never stepped out of his palace room, also engaged in a longer and more sustained conversation with Archmagos Call. Approximately several days later, you, as Primarch Guilliman's brother, finally obtained the opportunity to formally meet with him. However, an Ultramarine responsible for delivering messages led you directly to a private meditation chamber belonging to the Primarch, rather than the palace room previously used to receive guests. However, when you, driving your vibranium power armor, stepped into that meditation chamber, you immediately saw the Primarch, his tall and robust physique clad in the armor of fate, sitting at the edge of a large wooden table, his massive blue hands, covered in thick ceramite, tightly covering his entire bronze face. Before you could even speak a word, Primarch Guilliman, who had already sensed your arrival, abruptly raised his bronze face, his expression slightly distorted, and gazed at you with a pair of painful eyes that seemed to contain countless complex emotions, saying, "My little brother, 10,000 years, I have been asleep for a full 10,000 years. Look at what humanity has become now. Perhaps we ourselves are the same, blind faith, ignorance, suffering, decadence. Even all of these things are rampant in the name of a God. What's even more ironic is that this God himself detests this title." You, as a Primarch brother, silently listened to his complaints and grievances. You intended to soothe Primarch Guilliman's somewhat collapsed emotions and thoughts after learning all the truths about the Imperium of Man over the past 10,000 years. However, at this moment, Primarch Guilliman, slightly shifting his gaze of pain, stared at an ancient painting that seemed to depict the Emperor and continued to speak. "We have failed, Father, you have failed your sons, and we have also failed you. Our arrogance and vanity have created the current Imperium of Man, we have failed humanity itself. Didn't Horus initially claim that you abandoned humanity and attempted to ascend to godhood, thereby using this as an excuse to launch the Great Heresy? Doesn't the current state of the Imperium of Man invite his schadenfreude? But, why am I still alive?" At this moment, Primarch Guilliman abruptly activated the armor of fate and rose from the massive wooden table. He stared intently at the blurred halo painting symbolizing the Emperor himself on the elegantly decorated wall, roaring almost hysterically. "What else do you want from me? I gave you everything, gave it to them, look at what they have done to our dreams. Now, within the bloated and corrupt carcass of the Imperium, there is no longer a trace of rationality or hope to be found. Only endless fear, hatred, and ignorance maintain this dying, rigid corpse. Had I known this would happen, I would rather have been burned to ashes by the flames of the traitors in the great fire personally ignited by Horus than to live and see all of this. At this moment, you gazed at Primarch Guilliman, whose entire aura suddenly declined, and stepped forward. You stood beside him, looking up at Primarch Guilliman's bronze face, and said in a calm tone, "Brother, do you know, I was just a mortal from another world, yes, a mortal with no power to restrain a chicken. From the perspective of a mortal, I fought for the Imperium of Man on many tragic battlefields. I personally witnessed countless human compatriots paying the price of their lives for their homes, for their faith, and for their future. At that time, it seemed that only death accompanied me. The weak me could not change the course of a war, or even influence the final fate of any mortal. Brother, do you know what gave me strength and allowed me to continue fighting? Do you think it was the Emperor? No, it wasn't her, or rather, it wasn't just her attention to me. It was a weapon handed to me by my comrade who was about to die in battle. It was a pot of clear water sent to me by human civilians who risked their lives to save me. It was a pair of purple eyes that I have always hidden deep in my memory, never daring to forget even a fraction. Guilliman, you can go to the window of the meditation chamber and take a look. Countless human citizens and warriors below are cheering for your awakening and return. Each of them has just lost family, friends, children, and relatives due to the invasion of chaos, but what can they do? They can only have a good cry in secret, and then continue to rebuild their homes, because as long as they are still alive, even days filled with suffering must continue. How innocent they are, how innocent the human race itself is. Because the root cause of all this has never been us humans, but those traitors who have betrayed their own race. Therefore, we gene seed primarchs who can shoulder difficult responsibilities must continue to fight, even if we are facing death. If you think they are ignorant and blindly faithful, then guide them in your primarch identity, and guide them onto a more correct path. If you think they are ignorant and decadent, then slowly teach them in your primarch identity, and learn to listen to their words and wishes. Guilliman, my brother, my elder brother. The Imperium of Man for 10,000 years may have been overwhelmed and decayed, but hope for the human race still exists. At this moment, your heartfelt words seemed to quietly infuse a spark of hope into Primarch Guilliman, completely igniting the ideal land that already existed deep within his heart. In the next moment, the powerful aura emanating from his entire tall and robust body returned, and even stronger than before, Primarch Guilliman turned to look down at you, his voice deep and powerful. Little brother, you were right. I was fortunate enough to have grown up in a better era, a golden age filled with hope and triumph. As a son of the Emperor, one of the transcendent primarchs of the Imperium of Man, I have no right to indulge in self-pity. If I, facing these human citizens who grew up in the ignorant and chaotic Dark Age, but whose courage and strong will have not weakened in the slightest, were to reveal even a trace of fragility and helplessness, how indulgent and willful would that be? Primarch Guilliman, standing in front of you, slowly placed one of his massive blue hands gently on your vibranium shoulder armor. Now, he seemed to have firmly locked all the sadness and desolation in the depths of his soul and heart, leaving only the terrifying fury for justice and for the chaos traitors. I have always believed in the infinite potential of our human race. I believe that a more glorious future can still be hoped for. Even the decayed Imperium of Man still has the possibility of being reborn from the ashes. In any case, thank you, little brother, and thankfully you exist, so that I understand that even after 10,000 years, I am not alone, and there are still people fighting alongside me. In the following period, you had lengthy conversations lasting several days with Primarch Guilliman, whose mind had returned to a normal state. First, you told him about your encounters with other loyal Primarchs, their subsequent whereabouts, and the battle stories against the traitor Primarchs. Subsequently, you also revealed to Primarch Guilliman your special ability to descend upon different points in time, as well as some information about the homeworld. In response, Primarch Guilliman only showed a slight curiosity about your ability to descend, and he was clearly more concerned about the existence of the homeworld. After all, it represented the resources and population of an endless universe, as well as a haven temporarily free from the ravages of chaos. And when you inadvertently revealed your intention to find some ultramarines who were more adept at management and construction to help you manage the homeworld, Primarch Guilliman, unable to wait, even wanted to immediately summon the entire Ultramarines chapter and its successor chapters for you to choose from. Of course, after your explanation, he completely understood that you were only descending as a replica and did not have the teleportation ability to take everyone away. Therefore, Primarch Guilliman decided to set aside a short period of time in the future to prepare a management and construction plan for the homeworld specifically for you. According to him, as long as you follow his management and construction plan step by step, in just 100 years, you might be able to build a super army sufficient to support a great crusade, sweeping away all the monsters and demons in the homeworld universe. You expressed your gratitude, but you believed that with the complexity of the various cosmic forces in the homeworld, it might not be as easy as Primarch Guilliman said. Afterward, you and Primarch Guilliman agreed on a plan to go to Terra to meet the Emperor. On the one hand, Primarch Guilliman wanted to personally meet the Emperor after he ascended the Golden Throne to gain some recognition from him and resolve some doubts. On the other hand, it was also because Primarch Guilliman needed to fully control the entire hierarchy of the Imperium to lay a more solid material foundation for the future Indomitus Crusade. After thinking repeatedly for a moment, you informed him in advance of the traitor candidates within the High Lords of Terra. Only after Primarch Guilliman repeatedly pressed you did you slightly reveal some of the information that could be disclosed about the Terra massacre that had not yet occurred. However, Primarch Guilliman, with a slight frown, told you earnestly. Simply governing a planet or even an empire cannot rely solely on the threat of killing, but requires more sophisticated political means, such as winning over one faction and attacking another, so that the enemy can be used for your benefit, which is the best option. You were noncommittal about this, but out of respect for the fact that he was doing it for your own good, you did not refute him. At this moment, while listening to Primarch Guilliman's earnest teachings, you let most of your thoughts wander away. You suddenly remembered that when you last went to Holy Terra, there was no news of you and Guilliman arriving side by side. In other words, if no unexpected situation occurred, you must have once again died in the long journey of escorting Primarch Guilliman to Terra for pilgrimage. Just then, Primarch Guilliman seemed to notice your absent-mindedness. He shook his head slightly, vaguely let out a sigh, and then signaled to you that the conversation between the brothers was temporarily over. You grinned at him, then activated the vibranium power armor and turned to walk out of the meditation chamber. However, as you passed by the ancient furniture stored in the stasis fields around you, you accidentally saw a red flower tightly enveloped by a small stasis field and a heavy transparent container. Guilliman, what is this? Little brother, haven't you seen it before? That's a Lycoris radiata. This is probably the last Lycoris radiata to bloom before the ecological environment on Terra was completely destroyed. At this moment, Primarch Guilliman, who was looking down and sending various orders, said to you without raising his head. You shook your head slightly, and your eyes inadvertently glanced at the string of rosary beads wrapped around your vibranium arm. Without any hesitation, you took out the blood scythe with its sharp blade from the storage page. Without damaging the small stasis field or the heavy transparent container, you cleanly and neatly transferred the last Lycoris radiata completely from the display case to your vibranium palm. If you wanted it, you could have just said so. Did you think I wouldn't give it to you? As for, forget it, just take it. A hint of helplessness suddenly appeared on Primarch Guilliman's raised bronze face. In the end, he still focused all his attention on mobilizing the fleet and the Astartes, ignoring your destructive behavior. You put away the blood scythe and waved your vibranium palm towards Primarch Guilliman without any politeness. Holding the red Lycoris radiata, which was frozen in its blooming stage by the small stasis field, you walked out of the meditation chamber. You directly activated the vibranium power armor and went outside the palace. After encountering numerous ultramarines who were patrolling back and forth kneeling and saluting several times, you subconsciously activated the transparency talent that allowed people to ignore your existence, transforming into an invisible person that no one could detect, and entered the bustling and noisy Macragge. You carefully squeezed past one after another mortal who was celebrating the return of Primarch Guilliman, and your heavy magnetic boots also stepped on one ancient building street after another. Finally, in front of a magnificent cathedral with a huge architectural scale, you clearly saw the golden figure who was talking and praying with some sisters of battle and ecclesiarchy priests. You didn't immediately step forward, but silently stood there, gazing at her every move. Until the living Saint Celestine turned her head with incomparable vigilance, and as her short black hair danced, she couldn't help but clench the fiery blade inserted in her power armor waist. You sighed helplessly and took the initiative to cancel the transparency talent in front of everyone. Holding the last Lycoris Radiata from Holy Terra, you strode forward in your vibranium power armor. At this moment, the surrounding sisters of battle and ecclesiarchy priests were first slightly stunned, and then everyone knelt down on one knee in your direction with fanatical expressions. You, unusually, didn't bother to pay attention to them, but stared at the living Saint Celestine, who had a slight frown, and her deep purple eyes, and said indifferently, "It is said that this is the last Lycoris Radiata on Holy Terra. I don't have anything to give you in return, so I can only choose to give it to you. Respected Primarch, you must know that I may really not be the person you think I am." The living saint, blinking her purple eyes, slightly fanned the pair of pure white wings behind her back. She raised her fair face and said in a slightly cold voice, "I know, and I understand, but please tell her for me that I have never forgotten her for even a second. Even if the galaxy collapses in the future and the universe is destroyed, it will never change." You said to the living Saint Celestine word by word, and the red Lycoris Radiata, frozen in its blooming stage in your vibranium palm, was also handed to her. You seemed to observe the living Saint Celestine hesitating for a moment, but in the end, she reached out and took the red Lycoris Radiata stored in the small stasis field and heavy transparent container. "I will personally convey the Primarch's words and gifts to her. Then, see you later, Celestine." You nodded slightly to the living saint who was silently looking at the red Lycoris Radiata, and then you turned and left without looking back, driving the power armor with its vibranium wings slightly folded. At the same time, a dark green tall figure standing on the top of the magnificent cathedral slowly put on a white hood and quickly disappeared, and another tall black figure standing on a building several kilometers away, carrying a heavy warhammer on his shoulder armor, also slowly turned and left, disappearing with you completely into the shadows of Macragge's ancient buildings. While everything on Macragge was being methodically controlled by the Primarch Guilliman, a large number of Imperial battlecruisers rapidly arrived in the near-planetary orbit of the capital planet. Dozens of successor chapters originating from the Ultramarines chapter rushed to pay homage to the resurrected Primarch Guilliman. The Nova Marines, the Sons of Warrar, the Genesis chapter, the Penitents, and countless other, Blue Sons and Grandsons, immediately pledged their loyalty to Primarch Guilliman. At the same time, these, Blue Sons and Grandsons, also had their first audience with you, the Lost Primarch. Many Astartes matched the legendary stories passed down throughout the Imperium with you personally. However, at this moment, as the number of Astartes on Macragge continued to increase, the Lord High Governor of the capital planet suddenly proposed a suggestion to you and Primarch Guilliman. Why not take this opportunity to hold a grand military parade and send the news of the Primarch's return to every world of the Imperium via psychic communication? You rejected the suggestion without any hesitation. You believed that such a wasteful celebration was useless, and currently, both you and Primarch Guilliman were focused on organizing a pilgrimage fleet to Holy Terra. Although Primarch Guilliman also clearly wanted to refuse, the constant persuasion from the Lord High Governor still made him reluctantly agree to the request. Thus, in just a few days, a magnificent triumphal procession from the Titan Gate of Macragge to the Fortress of Hera was prepared by countless officials. Thousands of war vehicles and knight armors, along with Astartes and mortal warriors, totaling millions of individuals, lined up neatly and disciplined to begin this exercise. The entire population of Macragge flocked to participate in this grand military parade. Countless people gathered at intersections or in squares to watch the ceremony unfold, constantly erupting in cheers that resonated throughout the sky. At this moment, you and Primarch Guilliman, standing on a viewing platform with the chapter masters of the various successor chapters, had to admit. Although the military parade in front of you consumed a lot of resources and slowed down your plan to organize the pilgrimage fleet, the boost to the morale of countless mortal citizens was something that money couldn't buy. Just then, amidst the constant cheers and jubilation of countless mortal citizens for you two Primarchs, the Lord High Governor in charge of the military parade staggered towards you. With a slightly fawning expression, he presented Primarch Guilliman and you each with a delicately carved laurel wreath and a power dagger symbolizing the Primarch's status. Standing aside, Primarch Guilliman sighed helplessly. Unable to resist the other party's repeated persuasion, he intended to reach out and take the laurel wreath. You lowered your head slightly, your gaze fixed on the precious gifts held high by the other party's two withered hands, and subconsciously twitched your nose. You suddenly sensed that the skin beneath the heavy auramide armor was constantly triggering goosebumps. You faintly sensed a trace of the bloodline aura of the demon Primarch Fulgrim emanating from the Lord High Governor's body. Bang! You suddenly raised an auramide hand and slammed Primarch Guilliman's massive hand, which was about to touch the laurel wreath and power dagger, down heavily. Slightly stunned, Primarch Guilliman reacted very quickly. Without any hesitation, he activated his massive armor of fate and stepped forward. A huge blue hand suddenly grabbed the Lord High Governor's neck, then brutally slammed the entire person onto the marble floor of the viewing platform. At the same time, every chapter master standing around activated their power armor and rushed forward. Following your gesture, they immediately formed an airtight human wall with their tall bodies, blocking the view of countless citizens while also preventing the corrupted Lord High Governor from making a desperate move. Hiss, hiss, ha ha. At this moment, as the low, ferocious laughter gradually echoed around and the chaotic illusions that obscured everyone's extraordinary senses suddenly disappeared. The Lord High Governor, whose entire body was twisting and deforming, began to reveal his true form under your and Primarch Guilliman's cold gaze. This was an abominable and twisted abomination covered in purple scales, with limbs distorted and muscles knotted into clumps. Around the neck of this chaotic body was a strange necklace clearly made of meticulously tanned human skin. Oh, my foolish brother, welcome back to the human empire you love so dearly. Has the fatal wound I left you healed successfully? What a pity, this small fragment of myself, separated from my main body, was prepared as a gift for you in 22 that you will never forget. In you, my even more repulsive little brother, I find that I hate you more and more. What would have happened if you had let him pick it up and play with it casually? Would he really have fallen on the spot? Hee hee, but just the thought of that possibility made me instantly grow a set of female organs that shouldn't have existed, it's so refreshing. Ha ha ha, my poor and pathetic brothers, enjoy this last moment of tranquility. This is just the first link in the countless temptations I have prepared for you. Fortunately, you, the wise and mighty Guilliman, were able to return successfully, giving me another precious plaything to tease in this cold and ruthless universe. Of course, I also sincerely wish that you two brothers will never again be able to feel any glory or joy brought about by victory from now on. At this moment, words filled with mad ridicule and seductive panting from the demon Primarch Fulgrim suddenly echoed in the depths of your and Primarch Guilliman's minds. You couldn't help but quickly draw the blood scythe, with its sharp blade wreathed in green light, from your storage page. The Primarch Guilliman, with an incomparably cold expression, also drew the Emperor's sword, burning with blazing psychic flames, from the side of his armor of fate. In the next second, the Emperor's sword, tightly held in Primarch Guilliman's massive hand, pierced the fragile body of the abominable abomination in front of you, while the blood scythe you suddenly swung cleaved off the creature's entire head. After the hideous laughter from the demon Primarch Fulgrim gradually disappeared from the depths of your minds. The abominable abomination in front of you, which had carried the other party's will, had also been completely incinerated into ashes by the psychic flames burning on the Emperor's sword. At this moment, this sudden major change did not cause the countless people who had entered a state of frenzy to feel the slightest fear or confusion. On the contrary, under the propaganda of a large number of Macragge administrative officials, it became a powerful testament to your and Primarch Guilliman's heroic defeat of the traitors' conspiracy. However, the sudden appearance of Demon Primarch Fulgrim also served as a slight reminder to you and Primarch Guilliman. That is, the traitor Primarchs who have turned to the Chaos Gods have already gained a sense of bloodline through the awakening and return of Guilliman himself, and they are gradually becoming excited, and they will use the evil power of the Chaos Gods to warmly welcome Primarch Guilliman's return. You and Primarch Guilliman had to speed up the progress of organizing the pilgrimage fleet to Holy Terra. After discussion, you also believe that every period of time the pilgrimage action is delayed, there will be more unpredictable changes. At the same time, the Ultramarines chapter, which had regained its full strength, also launched a secret identification, detention, and cleansing campaign against the mortal administrative officials and aristocratic class on Macragge under the personal leadership of Lord Cypher and the Wolf Cub. This was not an order from Primarch Guilliman himself, but rather a subconscious judgment you made for the sake of the overall situation of the 500 worlds. After all, after you two Primarchs take away most of the Astartes and dozens of battle cruisers, the 500 worlds of Ultramar, which will temporarily become a vacuum, need a more stable capital planet to sit in. Primarch Guilliman did not question or obstruct your order in any way. On the contrary, he felt a trace of sincere relief that you were learning his thinking patterns and ways of thinking. Soon after, under the constant command and mobilization of Primarch Guilliman, a large-scale Terra pilgrimage fleet was finally ready. And the successors of the Ultramarines, such as the Nova Marines, the Mortifactors, and the survivors of the Battle of Calth, the Space Wolves, the Black Templars, and the Dark Angels, and many other Astartes chapters quickly boarded the interior of each ship. Next, Saint Celestine, the Living Saint, also led several squads of Battle Sisters who had come to pay homage to Primarch Guilliman, and Grandmaster Voldus of the Grey Knights' Third Brotherhood joined the command echelon of the pilgrimage fleet. After Lord Cypher and the Wolf Cub had very quickly and covertly dealt with a small number of Chaos cultists who were hiding extremely deeply on Macragge, the Ultramarines chapter, whose numbers had always been maintained at full strength, also divided about 2/3 of the Astartes, plus a veteran-composed honor guard, the Unbowed, chose to follow Primarch Guilliman. According to Chapter Master Calgar's words to you, even if all their sons were to die in battle to protect their Gene Father, they would not want to endure another period of painful days when the Primarch was in a near-death slumber. Just as you and Primarch Guilliman were confidently planning to announce the official departure of the entire fleet and begin this pilgrimage to Holy Terra to meet the Emperor, a mysterious plague called the Tear Plague suddenly began to spread continuously across a large number of worlds in the 500 worlds of Ultramar. Primarch Guilliman, who had just obtained a lot of intelligence information, wanted to immediately lead the entire expedition fleet to deal with the plague incident in the 500 worlds. But before his order could be issued, you reached out and stopped him in person. Brother, I know that you have always had a heartfelt aversion and disgust for religion. Believe me, many times I am also very annoyed by religion, but in some cases, the seemingly ignorant ecclesiarchy forces are also a special means that can be used well. Haven't you noticed yet? The so-called Tear Plague is just a small game that Mortarion, another traitorous brother of ours, is using to welcome you. If you led all the fleets to provide support, it will only greatly slow down the time and progress of you and me going to Holy Terra to meet the Emperor. Why not do this? I will issue an order in the name of you and me as Primarchs, calling on all the ecclesiarchy priests and fanatical believers who can receive this order to launch a large-scale rescue operation for the Imperial worlds that are suffering from the plague. Although in my vision, they only have the devout belief in the Emperor and the large-scale holy water rain plan that I believe can temporarily suppress the Tear Plague, this can barely allow all the plague patients to last longer. Your words caused Primarch Guilliman in front of you to temporarily fall into a state of contemplation. In the end, he had to slowly close his eyes with an expression mixed with pain and indifference, which was regarded as agreeing with your series of handling methods for this matter. Just like the situation you had already noticed before. The more your pilgrimage expedition is delayed, the more changes you may encounter. Whether it is the traitor Primarchs or the Chaos Gods, in order to completely delay your progress, they will definitely devise more vicious plans. In the following period of time, you quickly ordered the astropaths on the ships to send out psychic communications calling on the Ecclesiarchy forces to launch a support operation to the 500 worlds of Ultramar, and quickly received replies and responses from Shrine worlds. After the first-hand intelligence information from the plague outbreak area quickly entered Primarch Guilliman's sight. His two hearts, which had always been hanging, completely fell back to their original place in his chest. Your clever method did indeed successfully play a huge role. With the rapid arrival of many ecclesiarchy priests and a large number of fanatical believers, the ubiquitous power of faith also greatly suppressed the spread and ravages of the mysterious plague. You two Primarchs decided to take this opportunity to immediately lead the pilgrimage fleet, led by the Gloriana-class battleship *Macragy's Honor, to launch an expedition to Holy Terra. Countless huge metal ships quickly deployed the most important Geller fields and slowly sailed into the depths of the mysterious and treacherous warp lanes. But you quickly discovered a more abnormal situation. Originally normal warp lanes suddenly set off bursts of warp storms like huge waves, which made the entire pilgrimage fleet only able to carefully carry out short-range warp jumps, and the coordinate position of the fleet's return to the real world was often far from the predetermined coordinates. Of course, even if you and Primarch Guilliman's entire pilgrimage fleet encountered countless difficulties and dangers, you were still stubbornly continuing to advance in the direction of Terra. Until your entire fleet, after a long voyage, successfully arrived at the edge of the maelstrom, this incomparably tenacious forward posture was completely terminated. At this moment, you and Primarch Guilliman's pilgrimage fleet were facing the Chaos Thousand Suns fleet personally led by another demon Primarch, Magnus the Red. The Thousand Suns flagship, the Tiska's Vengeance, positioned its massive, pyramid-shaped metal hull across the entire void route. Countless weapon arrays continuously unfolded from within the Silver Pyramid, and in coordination with numerous Chaos ships in the vicinity, unleashed a relentless barrage of fire upon your pilgrim fleet and that of Primarch Guilliman. A large number of Imperial ships immediately deactivated the Geller fields enveloping their hulls, hastily activating multicolored void shields to withstand the omnipresent, fierce attacks. Those Imperial ships that had not yet activated their void shields either relied on their extremely sturdy metal structures to endure the damage, or quickly became shipwreckage scattered throughout the cold void. At this moment, you and Primarch Guilliman suddenly heard the vague taunts and psychic whispers of the Crimson King, Magnus. He began by mocking how all of your and Guilliman's ideas and actions were within the control of the Chaos Gods. Then, he expressed his delight that his plan to avenge the Imperium had finally found a target worthy of his personal attention. As soon as he finished speaking, the cold-faced Primarch Guilliman slowly drew the Emperor's sword, ablaze with roaring flames, from his waist of the armor of fate, while the hand of Dominion echoed with the crisp sound of bolters being cocked. He intended to lead his honor guard, the Victrix Guard, in a boarding action against the Thousand Suns flagship. You stopped him without hesitation. You said calmly to Primarch Guilliman, "It would be best for you to carry out such a dangerous, and possibly one-way, boarding action, while Primarch Guilliman needed to be responsible for holding the fleet's center, preventing any other mishaps." Finally, after a moment of contemplation, Primarch Guilliman had to agree to your request. He raised a large blue hand and heavily patted your Auramite shoulder plate. You smiled slightly at him, then quickly activated your Auramite power armor to find Cypher and the Wolf Cub. The three of you met on the mid-decks of the Macragy's Honor, and many Astartes survivors from the Battle of Calth came to your vicinity to await orders. You took a deep breath and said frankly to everyone around you that this was likely to be a one-way boarding battle. You had to eliminate the Crimson King Magnus as soon as possible so that Primarch Guilliman's upcoming pilgrimage crusade would be smoother. However, at this moment, before you could finish speaking, You clearly saw that not a single Astartes showed the slightest fear or hesitation. They quickly activated their power armor and stepped forward, obviously prepared to follow you, their primarch, to the death. You nodded slowly to everyone in front of you. All of you began preparing for this boarding action. You found several Techmarines from the Ultramarines chapter and searched the vast armory of the Macragi's honor for suitable ammunition and supplies. You refilled the storage bays, which had been almost completely depleted, with a large number of melta-bombs. You accidentally discovered a dozen vortex grenades, sealed and enshrined, in a corner of the vast armory. You immediately gathered all the vortex grenades as if you had found a treasure. Soon after, nearly 100 fully armed Astartes, led by you, Cypher, and the Wolf Cub, regrouped in front of a dozen assault boats. Now, Cypher seemed to have reached some ideological reconciliation with the Dark Angels beside him, and he had successfully become their squad leader. Standing behind the Wolf Cub were many sons of Fenris from the Space Wolves, and the remaining dozen or so Black Templars. Without any hesitation, you stepped into the assault boats and quickly plunged into the cold void, where countless lances of light and lasers crisscrossed. In order to completely attract the attention of the Crimson King Magnus and prevent him from launching large-scale psychic attacks on the fleet itself, you even connected to the Thousand Suns flagship's communication channel. You began to use rhetoric aimed at the Crimson King Magnus to launch a continuous verbal barrage, and even called him out by name to have a one-on-one battle between brothers. Before long, you heard the Crimson King Magnus's deep chuckle in your ears. Next, perhaps because of arrogance or because he believed that everything was predestined, even the dozen assault boats carrying the Astartes did not suffer any fire from the Thousand Suns fleet, but instead smoothly penetrated the interior of their flagship. Thump, thump, thump. The next second, wielding the Blood Reaper, you activated your Auramite power armor, led the Astartes, clutching bolters and melee weapons, and burst out of the assault boat, launching a terrifying slaughter against all the chaos enemies around you. Countless horrors and chaos cultists wielding weapons took on the role of cannon fodder, constantly hindering your advance. Once you, Cypher, and the others reformed into a triangular assault formation, few chaos enemies could stop your boarding party. You quickly slaughtered back and forth in the incredibly complex ship corridors of the pyramid-shaped Thousand Suns flagship, constantly searching for exits. After the boarding party unexpectedly encountered psychic attacks and terrifying curses from several Thousand Suns sorcerers, losing many Astartes, you successfully discovered a passage leading to the bridge. However, at this moment, a massive red figure, 9 meters tall, suddenly appeared in front of you. The winged figure held a massive spellbook and golden staff. Heh, my poor little brother, is that primped and preening Gilliman too afraid to come himself? How disappointing. The Crimson King Magnus, with his remaining eye, looked down at you and sneered in a low voice. Also, didn't you yell that you wanted to duel me? Now, I'm here. HMPH. You let out a cold snort through your skull helmet. You did not engage in any verbal communication with the Crimson King Magnus in front of you. You, Cypher, and the Wolf Cub exchanged a brief glance, and the three of you nodded in tacit understanding. CHZZ, CHZZ, CHZZ. The next second, a warp energy beam that suddenly tore through the air rapidly bloomed from the soulstone on the skull helmet. One by one, the purple glowing metal oath rings also flew back and forth in this wide ship corridor, rapidly bombarding the Crimson King Magnus. Rumble. Bolts of extremely terrifying psychic lightning erupted from the Red Magnus's golden scepter, continuously blasting away the metal rings. Even if you, Lord Cypher, and the Wild Child can rely on your constitution and psychic defenses far exceeding those of ordinary Astartes to withstand the power of his sorcery. But the Astartes who followed behind you were not so lucky. They only had time to pull the triggers of their bolters a few times towards the Red Magnus, firing off a series of roaring bolts. One by one, their towering bodies were burned into masses of charred, carbonized ash within their power armor by the terrifying psychic lightning. Cypher. At this moment, you roared loudly towards Lord Cypher beside you without turning your head. Large amounts of acrid, Blue smoke, dissipating in the wind, constantly billowed from inside your skull helmet, but the movements of your body, still driving the vibranium power armor forward, did not stop in the slightest. The next second, several melta-bombs, already activated, detached from one of Lord Cypher's ceramite gauntlets and flew rapidly towards the Red Magnus. Buzz buzz buzz. However, at this moment, those melta-bombs, still in midair, were forcibly solidified by extremely powerful chaos psychic energy, and then burst into clusters of brilliant light without any power. Subsequently, a considerably thick psychic shield abruptly appeared around the Red Magnus's towering demonic body, constantly radiating terrifying psychic fluctuations. Heh 22, did you really think I didn't know your usual nasty habits? Our other good brother, the Lord of Iron Perturabo, has always remembered your suicidal melta attacks very clearly. I will personally deliver your entire spine, along with your skull, to Perturabo, and then persuade him to join me in sending a final grand gift to the sanctimonious Guilliman. At this moment, the Red Magnus's sinister laughter and whispers echoed in your ears. You slightly shook your skull helmet, subconsciously tightening your grip on the blood scythe in your palm. Immediately afterwards, a towering figure, with wisps of red aura coiling around his body, vigorously swung the lightning serpent entwined breaker of Forge's Warhammer, launching an even more astonishingly swift charge towards the Red Magnus. Rumble. In an instant, the psychic sorceries that the Red Magnus casually conjured seemed to temporarily lose their effect on the wild child's towering body. Until the distance between the two rapidly shortened, the lightning serpent entwined breaker of Forge's Warhammer, also carrying an extremely terrifying whistling hum, heavily crashed down on the upper part of his calf, completely shattering most of his thick thigh. A follower of Khorne. 22, how dare you condone gene seed descendants defecting to other chaos gods? Instantly enraged, the Red Magnus quickly abandoned continuing to use psychic sorcery, and instead, with his Primarch-level physical strength and reaction speed, violently swung the golden scepter in his other red hand. At the same time, you and Lord Cypher also seized the opportunity to activate your power armor, charging forward relentlessly. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The white tiger greatsword, with a low tiger's roar entwined between its blades, and the blood scythe, wreathed in green light, heavily slashed at the Red Magnus's towering demonic body, also completely tearing apart the golden armor and chaos flesh on his lower body. PFF'd. The Red Magnus, unable to restrain himself from letting out an angry roar, instantly pierced the wild child's thick chest armor with the golden scepter in his red hand, even lifting his entire body into the air. The massive spellbook that his other red hand violently swept outwards also slammed heavily into Lord Cypher, who was unable to dodge in time. Against the nearby bulkhead, the sharp blade of the White Tiger greatsword was actually forcibly embedded deep into Cypher's power armor. Buzz buzz buzz. Just at this moment, a giant red hoof, suddenly slamming towards your skull helmet, was rapidly slowed down by layers of invisible temporal force fields. It was Lord Cypher, heavily kneeling to one side, enduring the severe injuries within his body, who activated the chrono crystal's bullet time. 10 seconds. I can only hold on for 10 more seconds. Lord Cypher, constantly overflowing with large amounts of scabbed blood from his mouth, roared loudly towards your direction, close black lens bracket. At this moment, you subconsciously raised your head and gazed at the wild child, who was issuing a blood-soaked roar of rage towards the immobile Red Magnus, and the breaker of Forge's Warhammer that he was desperately swinging, despite his injuries, close black lens bracket. You turned your head again and gazed at Lord Cypher, who was kneeling on one knee, clearly also injured in a vital spot, close black lens bracket. You abruptly took a deep breath inside your skull helmet, and released your grip on the blood scythe in your palm. Without any hesitation, you took out several vortex grenades with even more terrifying power from your storage interface, and then, without hesitation, pulled the pins and threw the vortex grenades towards the area beneath the Red Magnus. Swish swish swish. In an instant, accompanied by a series of muffled explosion sounds. Rounds of vortex black holes, suddenly appearing beneath the towering demonic body with a diameter of several meters, incessantly tore at the chaos flesh on the Red Magnus's body, and strands of incomparably powerful attractive force also abruptly enveloped your towering body. You only had time to glance at the Wild Child and Lord Cypher, who were struggling to support themselves around you. Your entire towering body, along with the Red Magnus who was close at hand, was instantly devoured by the massive vortex black holes produced by the explosion of several vortex grenades. Your consciousness rapidly descended into a blurred state. Your vibranium power armor and the flesh and blood inside were completely twisted and deformed by the extremely terrifying black hole gravity, but the Red Magnus, who also suffered terrifying damage, was successfully banished back to the depths of the warp. You are dead. You are all dead. This simulation has ended, time elapsed unknown. The retainable options for this simulation are as follows. 1. Trazen's Tesseract Labyrinth. Open black lens bracket note. The Tesseract Labyrinth is an extremely mysterious Necron artifact, shaped like a standard cube, about the size of a normal human fist, with a miniature space preserved inside. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. The miniature space can use the Necrons' understanding and research of hypergeometry and phasing technology to imprison any target or object inside, and it is impossible to escape easily. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. The Tesseract Labyrinth is usually the best tool used by the Necrons to capture and even imprison shards of the star gods. To some extent, the miniature space that even the star god shards cannot destroy can be used to store anything. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. How come my Tesseract Labyrinth seems to be missing one? Damn it, that Primarch brat must have swiped it again. It must have been him. Trazen the Infinite, who had just left the ruins of Cadia, muttered to himself in annoyance. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket 2. Rosary of a Special Friend Master. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. The rosary is a talisman carrying a powerful force field generator, which can form a protective energy field around the wearer. The function of the energy field is to convert the energy impacting the surface into light, and in extreme cases, it can even completely nullify plasma gun damage. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. Because the ancient technology and materials used to manufacture the rosary are too precious and rare, and it is also a symbol of the tenets of the imperial cult, usually only high-ranking officials of the ecclesiarchy are granted this item. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. The rosary can be designed in the shape of an aquila or a cross, and a gem or the ecclesiarchy's emblem will also be inlaid on it as an embellishment, but the current rosary only has a main structure resembling a red teardrop strung together by countless red beads. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. Don't be afraid, I'm here, I've always been here. She slightly blinked her purple eyes, her gaze fixed on the red spider lily in her palm, and said softly, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket 3. Blood reconstruction and Laraman organ, Gilliman's rationality Primarch close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. This is a set of Primarch blood circulation system, developed using Gilliman's active cells, which combines blood reconstruction in a Laraman organ. The Laraman organ, shaped like a liver but only the size of a golf ball, will be implanted deep within a main artery inside your body along with the blood reconstruction organ and will continue to grow. At the same time, the Laraman organ is responsible for producing and storing large amounts of Laraman cells, and the blood reconstruction system is responsible for monitoring and controlling all previously implanted organs and tissues inside the body. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. It seems to have been enhanced and blessed by the Emperor. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. Its existence will allow you to quickly achieve hemostasis and scabbing after any part of your body is injured, as well as a certain degree of cell regeneration ability. Moreover, due to the special nature of Primarch Gilliman's own physique and the silent blessings from the bottom of his heart, you can, to a certain extent, independently control any organ or tissue inside your body and enjoy the synergistic amplification effect between the various organs and tissues. As for the special abilities hidden by this blood circulation system, you will need to use it for a long time to finally discover them. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Note: little brother, I hope you remember to come back and take back your development plan codex when we meet next time. Rebute Gilliman, who was conducting the Indomitus Crusade, diverted his attention in his rapidly revolving thoughts while commanding and mobilizing a large number of Astartes forces to launch an attack. Open black lens bracket. Note: sacrifice is the cornerstone of the Imperium, life is our currency. The cruel battlefields of the future cannot accommodate your sentimentalities, don't blame me, child. The icy sun, which is always located in the depths of the warp, seemed to vaguely reveal a fleeting, blurred murmur, and then this murmur was once again submerged in the endless, frenzied prayers and chaotic beliefs. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The number of throne gelt consumed in this simulation is 3. Close black lens bracket. Current throne gelt held, 17. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.